Sir, you're charged with especially aggravated kidnapping. You're also charged with aggravated assault, and you're charged with theft of a firearm worth less than $2,500.
You're talking about stuff that is not relevant.
Hello and welcome to the Court of Public Opinion. I am the Recovery Addict, and boy do I have a case for you today.
Why is the dog chewing on this guy?
I think they have got the wrong guy there.
Got the wrong guy, and the dog was biting him.
He roughing him up quite a bit. There's a lawsuit.
This is the next search on February 28, 2020, 7:44 p.m. How, period, does the FBI find people? And people's misspelled P-E-O-O-P-L-E. Did the defendant find out how the FBI finds people in this case? Oh, she found out.
I object.
What more do we need to see? Because he's the guy.
All right, welcome back. Sorry, I'm pushing all the buttons and doing it in the wrong order. My apologies. One day I'll figure out how to do this. But welcome back. Welcome to the Court of Public Opinion.
Video of roaches fighting. I don't know who won.
I don't know who won. I am the Recovery Addict. Thank you very much for joining us. We are getting set for what is this? I think this is officially day 3. Is that right? I think it's day 3 of the trial out of Arizona. We're waiting for all that to kick off down there as we continue the Arizona versus Kelly trial. Should start
This is
in
not Burger King. People do not get to have it their way.
I'm not a cat.
For those that were on this morning, let me let's turn that down a little bit. I'll turn this. Well, it's going to go away by itself, so that's all right. For those that were on this morning, I told you a little bit about Luke McFadden, the Maryland waterman who catches blue crabs. I had no idea that he had actually posted a video in which he was live on Fox News as a commentator on his boat on the water. He posted a video I think it was yesterday. He was on the bridge that collapsed the night before and was supposed to be on the bridge again the morning after that bridge collapsed. He lives 15 minutes from it. I had no idea he was that close. He put a video out. That's a very heartfelt video. I link that on the community tab on the YouTube channel. So if you go to the YouTube channel, this YouTube channel, Recovery Addict, and go over to the YouTube tab, you'll see that post and you'll be able to find him there. He's a huge YouTuber. He's got like 500,000 subscribers. But just a genuine guy, and he shares some really insightful stuff about the not just about the accident and what he has observed as someone who's lived on the Chesapeake and worked on the Chesapeake, been there the whole time, and understands how ships work and why it did what it did and what he can tell from that. But anyway, very very good video. So. Sadly, 6 lives were lost, and I think they're still trying to recover bodies on that one. But he was up next to the wreckage on his boat shortly after that happened because he lives right there. He just went got out of his house and got on the boat, and he was there. So anyway, I've been watching Luke for a long time. Luke is a great guy. He really is. So excited. He got married here this last year. He's just a cool guy. He has projects that are like my projects. He starts and has no idea how bad it's going to get. I love watching it and his positive attitude. Anyway, super excited for him for getting an opportunity to share his insights with a huge. Being on the news. Being on the news is huge. So anyway, it's really insightful, a good inside view, especially on the effect it's going to have in the community. So if you get a chance, do check that out and drop him a note and tell him thank you over on his channel. All right, that being said, we're getting ready for court here. Let's see. Many courts are operating today. Yeah, surprisingly, we've heard a couple that were not, but a few are, and ours is, but it's going to be on a accelerated schedule. I think we're going to get out a little bit early, so probably either around lunchtime or shortly after lunchtime, we're going to have an early out if everything goes according to plan. Of course, multiple witnesses, cross-examination, sometimes it takes forever. Sometimes the state takes forever getting things done. It helps if I'm on the screen, huh? Let's do that. Okay. Ooh. Starting to get some early video and audio from court, so we'll keep an eye as they're getting everything ready. It's going to be a few minutes before everybody's in place, but... Okay. It's not a government holiday. It's not a federal holiday. but a lot of state courts take this day off. No messages on screen. I will fix that. And I will also say the SF in Texas, congratulations, first in chat this morning. So you're taking over on Happy Good Friday. First in chat. The internet's all yours. SF in Texas. You've won before. You've got I wouldn't say lengthy rap sheet, but you're not new to the recidivism rate is sort of higher for you, I would say, than most. Congratulations. The internet is all yours. Make sure you have your certificate to commemorate your offense for the low fine of 50 cents. Let's see. Robin says, during morning break, I watched Luke McFadden. You have to watch the one that says, what is it? Baltimore, things will never... Let me see what he said. I forget what he called it. I think it's called Baltimore, This Changes Everything. That's the video. It's about 15 minutes long. That's the one most of his videos are funny. Most of them, he's going to make you smile. He's going to make you laugh. You're going to learn a lot about what it's like to try to eke out a living on the Chesapeake as a crabber, a waterman. And he has just a fun sense of humor throughout all of it. So a good channel over there. He's one of the good ones. You can always watch that. His content, he puts out, I think, like once a week now, as far as new videos. And sometimes he'll go live when he's out actually catching crabs. And that's a blast to watch. As he's just one pot after another. He's got thousands of crab pots out that he just, checking and working, and from early in the morning till, just hardworking kid. He's an adult, right? He's a full-grown adult. He just looks like a kid with, cheeks you want to pinch. He's all cute. All right. Okay, spring break. Yes, lots of people on spring break. Susie liked and sneaking up to the balcony. Wonderful, Susie. Good to have you here. Let's see. Where are we? I see everyone's filing in. The seats are working. I think everything's functioning properly. We've got court ready. I think we need to get our counter up on screen. I'll get that set up.
I'm not a cat.
Okay, I'm showing we have 14 on the counter. This is the jury question counter. Let me make sure all the rest of the things are pointing in the right direction. Box 3. Let's make that 2 for now. DSK is going to tie so we can cut 2 and boom. Yep, looks good. That's a beautiful seal, by the way.
Squirrel.
Not quite white. I'm seeing a tan, but I think I'm wondering if not all the lights are on in the courtroom. I think white balance is a little bit off again, but we'll take it. We'll be back for court as soon as it starts. Does the Easter Bunny visit your house? Well, Creative B, unless we can find somewhere with Easter candy, no. We ate it all. We bought our Easter candy early, and then we had to sample it, and we sampled it and ate it all. So I'm sure we'll be able to find some candy somewhere. But yeah, we don't do. I would say growing up, we've never had the Easter's not like another Christmas for our families. We don't have all the gifts and things which I think I'm in the minority, but it wasn't something we've always had, like the eggs and the candy, and sometimes Easter egg hunts, and obviously there's a religious component, a big religious component to the celebration as well. But the Easter Bunny has never really been a thing. Maybe it's because when I was a little kid, we raised rabbits and we used them for food. So the whole idea of having an Easter Bunny that we didn't shoot and eat, maybe that's why. That was when I was very, very young. We'd have rabbits. Robin says, all right, you're the best. Thank you for all you do. Thank you, Robin, for the kind words. Congratulations on 6 months. Welcome to the Yellow Courthouse. Ohio Jen says, I've never been on an Easter egg hunt. It's more fun to find them the day they were hidden than several weeks later. I can tell you that much. Can we please get heated seats when you hit 57,000 subscribers? Pretty please. After all, I'm pretty much in the seat all day, every day. CBD, the great request. I'll put it on the list. Let's see. I think jury has heated seats. Another Ash Axiom gifted a membership this morning. Thank you. You guys have been so generous this morning. Many new people in green. Tash is the recipient here. Ash, meet Tash. Tash receives your gift, Ash. That's wonderful. Angela says, in that case, don't come to Sweden here. You shoot the rabbit, you go to prison. They're protected animals here. Angela, rabbits are protected in Sweden. I had no idea. I mean, these ones, we literally raised them. We had, I would say, over 100. It seemed like over 100 to me. Lots and lots of rabbits. All right. What did I just log into? You ate the Easter bunny? Yes, I did, fella. We did. Let's see. Oh, wait. Welcome, Judge. You're early. Hey, Judge. Yeah, he was looking at me. Why are you early? Now I'm worried. Tash, like, look who's back again, back in green. All right, it looks like we're kicking things off early. Let's see what the judge has to say this morning. I'll be tweaking the audio as best I can for you to give you the best listening experience I can. And of course, we'll be answering questions throughout. So feel free to.
Good morning. We're on the record. The record will show the presence of all counsel and the defendant. It's 8:30. The jury's ready, but I was told that counsel, I think it was defense counsel, wanted to raise a preliminary matter before the jury came in. Is that correct?
Yes, Judge. We just wanted to make a quick record. We had some discussions with the state yesterday regarding how to proceed with the witnesses since we're taking them out of order today. And we communicated to the state, and the state avowed to us essentially that they'll be able to lay foundation for the things that the experts that they are calling today will rely on. We are also taking a look at Rule 703, which states that the expert may base an opinion off of information that the expert has been made aware of or has personally observed himself. So we don't think that there's going to be a problem with this. We're accepting the state's avowal that they'll be able to lay the foundation, and the state has agreed to stipulate that if for whatever reason in the future the state is not able to lay that foundation, then we reserve our right to object based on foundation. And we're doing that also for the court's efficiency, but also as part of trial strategy, so we don't have to have witnesses come on the stand for 5 minutes, come off the stand, and then get recalled later, as that might be disruptive to the jury. So we just wanted to make a record that that's how we have communicated with the state and proceed today.
Thank you.
That's correct, Your Honor. We appreciate the things working with us on the scheduling to get more efficient for today. So we appreciate that.
All right, and let me just make sure I'm clear. First of all, I'm grateful that we're speaking to each other professionally like this and trying to resolve issues to make everything proceed more efficiently and expeditiously. But does that mean that there's a stipulation to the foundation? It doesn't mean that they don't have to call these witnesses, right? It just means that they're not going to.
Correct.
It does not mean. Let's say this.
We're deferring our objection on foundation until such time as, I suppose, they fail to lay it later with the proper witnesses.
So, okay, so for right now, the agreement is that the state doesn't need to call these 5-minute foundational witnesses to lay the foundation for the expert testimony that's anticipated today, but they will in the future at some point. And then if they're not able to, then that remedy that you can avail yourself of.
Yes.
Is that right?
That's great, Your Honor. So our experts are going to be talking about photos and about scenes and that we don't need to lay the foundation for, but we will later, subsequent to the testimony. So that's
all right. And does that mean, I assume this witness has some demonstrative exhibits?
I'm sorry.
Does this witness have any exhibits that he's going to introduce? Or?
Please, guys, report. We usually refer to it as report, and then maybe introduce or not introduce. We don't see how the testimony goes. And there's one other small little issue. There was a preclusion of other ammo in this case, but the witness, the expert, used other ammo recovered at the scene to test fire the gun, which is similar to the ammo in the case. And so we just want the court to be aware he's referring to other ammo used, and that's the other ammo.
So thank you. Appreciate you bringing that up. All right. Great. That's really good news. I appreciate it, Counsel. Very well. There's nothing further than we can bring in the jury. Have the witness here.
Yes.
Witness is in the back, Your Honor, or outside.
We can bring the witness in.
I see you. Thank you very much for the kind words. 5 months, wonderful. Bug Dugger as well. 5 gifted chats early on, right before we went live. Thank you, Bug Dugger, for your generosity to kick off the show as well. What just happened there is the state and the defense made an agreement. They said you don't have to bring in the foundational witnesses for your experts to testify.
All right, we're taking it. Well, hold on a second. So we're taking this witness now. And what about, you were still cross-examining?
Yes, we were cross-examining Castaneda, and we're going to come back to him.
Perfect, okay.
So out of order.
Sir, just wait right there. Sorry, I thought you were somebody.
I thought you were someone else.
We'll get the jury in, and we'll bring you forward and have you sworn. No, he can wait right there. You're fine.
And you could explain a little bit of this to the jury, I assume, Judge.
What do you want me to
Yeah, we're out of order.
Yes.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right. Okay.
Judge will do an explanation. Hopefully it makes sense. We're shuffling the witnesses. We're going to go back to the one who was on the stand yesterday at a later point. They've got some experts coming in today, at least one that they don't need the foundation for. They'll talk about the pictures and things like that, but later they're going to lay foundation, and then they can object if the foundation isn't sufficient. It's very confusing. I don't know how that. They literally are planning to unring a bell if foundation is not laid. So the defense is helping the prosecution. This is a big win or a big gift to the prosecution here. So maybe they'll get something in return later on. PJ Wolf, congratulations on 7 months. It's a little backwards, but as long as the parties agree, the court's okay with it. It could get a little messy if they later object, but usually foundations.
The record show the presence of all jurors, counsel, and the defendant. All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just talk to you for a second before we get started. Today, this gentleman here who's standing over here is going to be our first witness for today. I don't know anything about him or who he is. All I know is that he's come here from out of town, flew in last night. And so we're going to try and get this gentleman on. He's a witness for the state. He's going to take the stand now and provide his testimony. The gentleman was on the stand before. That was Deputy Castaneda. Is that right? And so in the interest of trying to make things move as efficiently as possible, we're going to take this witness out of order. Usually we finish with that witness that's on the stand. Some other witnesses will testify, and we'll get to this gentleman in turn. But he's from out of town. We're going to take him out of turn. He's going to take the stand now, be subject to examination by both parties, and then we'll bring back Officer Castaneda so that we can finish his cross-examination. There are some other witnesses that provide foundational testimony for what this witness is going to testify to, but the parties have worked that out with the court, and those witnesses will still testify. But I want to make sure we get this gentleman on and off today, finish with Officer Castaneda, and that will allow us then to take some shorter witnesses. And the goal really is to try to get us all out of here a little early today. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. All right? So thank you for your understanding. Any questions about that? Very well. All right, we're ready to proceed. Sir, if you would come forward now and be sworn by the clerk.
Is that clear as mud? Do we all understand why we're sort of shuffling things around?
That the testimony you're about to give in the matter before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God.
So this is still prosecutor's case. We've just gone out of order. We have an expert. No preliminary, which means we might be getting out earlier today than we thought, possibly even around lunchtime.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Rick, Mr. Cuen, can you state your name for the record and spell your last name?
Yes, my name is Richard T. Wyant, W-Y-A-N-T. I go by Rick.
May I call you Rick?
You can.
Rick, where are you from?
I'm from Seattle, Washington.
You flew in last night?
I did.
Let's talk about who you are. So walk the jury through a little bit about who you are, where your education is.
Sure. I'm a forensic scientist in the area of firearm and tool mark examination and shooting incident reconstruction. I obtained my bachelor's degree in 1993 from Colorado State University and my master's in 1994 from Colorado State University in forensic anatomy. My bachelor's was in microbiology, and in 1995 I was hired by the Texas Department of Public Safety, the Texas Ranger Crime Lab, to be trained as a criminalist in the area of firearm and tool mark examination. During those 3 years I was there, I was trained to do casework and also crime scene investigation. In 1998, I was hired by the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory in the Seattle area, and I've been there ever since. In 2008, I was promoted to supervisor, and in 2015, I started my own consulting firm doing the same type of work, shooting incident reconstruction, ballistic comparisons, less lethal weapon examinations, and that's the role that I am in today.
And how many years have you been doing this kind of work as a forensic scientist?
I hate to say it out loud, but it's 28 years I'm doing this type of work, and I'm also a member of several associations, published some papers, and presented at professional organizations.
Let's walk through some of those. You've worked at accredited state labs, correct?
I still do.
You still do. What's an accredited state lab? What does that mean?
Well, accreditation is a governing body that oversees crime laboratories to ensure they're following proper protocols and procedures that are commonly used for forensic work. And part of that is chain of custody, analysis protocols, how we report, how we testify. And as part of that accreditation, we're inspected every 5 years. They go through our case files to make sure that we're taking proficiency tests, that we haven't gotten in trouble or said anything wrong on the stand, and then we're deemed to be accredited. And so my laboratory that I've worked at has been accredited ever since I started there.
And in your 28 years, you obviously examined firearms.
I have.
How many would you say?
Thousands. And in addition to my examination, I also teach at the ATF Academy, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Academy in Maryland, where I train new firearms examiners. That's what I consider myself as a firearms examiner. I've been doing that since 2005. So in terms of handling firearms, during that course, I handled probably 50 during that week, in addition to all the firearms that I've examined during casework.
I'll come back to that. Let's talk about the other stuff you teach about, and any other teaching or any other training you provide to other agencies?
Yes, as part of my day job, I of course teach all of our law enforcement agencies in Washington, but I also travel and teach attorneys and law enforcement. I've taught regularly at the National SWAT Conference in TOA, National Tactical Officers Association, where I train SWAT officers in less lethal weapons, like beanbags, things like that. So I've done quite a bit of training in my career.
It means a lot of travel for you?
It is.
Let's go back. So you examined, I think your words were 1,000 or thousands of firearms.
Between casework and training others, yes.
We're talking about handguns?
Handguns, revolvers, rifles, some automatic rifles, muzzle loaders, and then less lethal launchers like 40 millimeter, and anything that can launch a projectile I've probably looked at in my career.
I've shot the 40 millimeters. Those are fun.
Style weapons?
Yes.
AK style weapons?
Yes.
And you've also examined crime scenes.
I have.
What do you do when you come to a crime scene? What's your goal?
My goal is to establish a series of events based on the evidence that I looked at, the objective collected evidence, to establish possible scenarios related to a shooting incident. There's a lot of methods and ways we do that. One is the physical examination of the evidence, and it's also documentation of the crime scene. And most recently, within the past 5 years or so, 3D laser scanning has been introduced to the crime scene realm. So I'm versed in that, and I've done probably 14 or 15 cases where I've utilized that technology to reconstruct a crime scene.
And I won't come back, but you also had reviewed a 3D scan in this case, right?
I did.
He's so excited. I did.
And you also do, I think you mentioned shooting scene reconstruction?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, like I just stated, it would be taking the evidence that's collected from the scene, photographs, occasionally witness statements, but typically I like to use the objective evidence that's collected. And so, for example, say I have a vehicle that has bullet holes in it. You can place trajectory rods into those holes, map out a possible bullet path, and then you can scan that car with a 3D laser scanner and then be able to determine possibly the origin of the shooter relative to the victim at the time that the shots occurred.
I think we'll hear more about
So
that.
your shooting scene reconstruction, did you apply that skill set in this case?
Yes.
And how many shooting scene reconstructions do you think you've done in your 28 years?
Well, every case that I analyze has an aspect of shooting reconstruction. So say I just get a bullet submitted to me and a firearm, but that bullet might have some defects or some characteristics on it that might lead to tell me where it came from or what it struck first. So that's technically considered a reconstruction, but the full reconstruction where I'm taking all the scene evidence, and I've probably done a couple of dozen for my career, not including what I did in Texas.
And you also work for, you taught and trained for manufacturers of weapons, right?
Yes.
Like, give us some examples.
Well, most of the training I do for manufacturers would be for less lethal applications, meaning a projectile that is intended to hurt you and not kill you. And I've helped develop a couple of those types of projectiles.
You also teach yearly at the ATF, Firearms Academy?
I do.
And ATF stands for?
Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. It's the federal regulatory agency for firearms. And they also host an academy that trains people to do what I do.
I've been interviewed by the BATF.
They bring in students from any local agency in the country, and they sponsor this academy. And I've been training at that academy for a week long. It's called Preliminary Examination of Firearms. It's essentially cycle of fire. So from the time you take that cartridge out of the ammunition box until the bullet is downrange and the cartridge case is on the ground, what has happened to it. So the cycle of fire of that cartridge. And that's what I teach at ATF.
You also teach things like operation of a weapon?
Yes, the cycle of fire certainly is encompassed by the operation of the firearm, the types of firearms that are out there that we might see as a forensic scientist.
You also talk about the capabilities of specific firearms. What I mean by capabilities, distance, how lethal they are, and so forth, right?
We have in-depth training on different types of projectiles and their behavior in flight and when they impact targets.
Do you shoot from a distance and measure and do all that stuff? How do you do that?
We shoot intervening objects. We ricochet bullets off of objects, capture them in ballistic gelatin. We track bullets on Doppler radar to map incremental velocity, how fast is it slowing down as it travels downrange. I've done that for a couple of long distance shooting cases that I've had. The jury has a question. Oh, you're raising your hand, sorry.
Scratching my nose, sorry.
Okay.
The jury has a question. He's on it.
All right, Rick, this is probably the most obvious question. You don't work for the Santa Cruz County Attorney's Office, do you?
I do not, and I'm not functioning as a role as the Washington State Patrol here either. This is my own private consulting firm that I'm working under today.
You were requested to assist in the investigation in this case?
Yes.
Do you know what this case is about?
Yes.
What was it about?
It was a shooting incident that occurred and where one person was shot and killed.
And what were you called to do? What were you asked to do in this case?
I was called to look at the crime scene and scan evidence and the ballistic evidence to determine if I could determine possible shooter locations and possible trajectory path of the bullet.
And before we get into that, what was the weapon that you reviewed, that you looked at?
I looked at an AK-47 pattern rifle. It was a semi-automatic version of the Russian AK-47, one of the most popular rifles in the world.
You also looked at what kind of projectile?
The ammunition associated with those rifles is a 7.62 by 39 caliber cartridge, which is a military rifle cartridge.
And you're familiar with this cartridge, right?
I am.
Have you ever testified about the distance that this cartridge can harm somebody?
I have. I had a long distance shooting case with this type of rifle involved.
How far of a distance was involved in that case?
In this particular case, it was 796 yards, so about 8 football fields, or half a mile.
From that distance, this cartridge was fired and killed somebody?
Yes.
I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ask you to put some gloves on. Your Honor, can I have Ayden help out? Can you grab the gun for us?
Interesting that there's no formal recognition as his expert status in this court. The court's willing to grant expert status to people just based on the fact that they have experience. It's just assumed.
Admitted as Government Exhibit 101. To you, I think you refer to it as 21JA. Does that sound familiar?
It does.
As they're getting the gun ready, you had you came down to Arizona to do the analysis in this case, right?
I did.
Right, and walk us through, like, where'd you go and who'd you meet with?
Went to a local shooting range. The sheriff's office met me there with the evidence, and I examined the rifle, test fired the rifle, and looked at the ammunition that was collected.
And then the rifle and stuff, what condition was it when you first saw it?
Oh, it was in a sealed condition with, I think, the box that you'll see here in a second. It was sealed by the sheriff's office, and then when I was done with my examination, I resealed it with my green evidence too.
Okay. And as detective, is he performing the same task as you saw him do when you came down to Arizona?
I couldn't see him, but probably.
You use a pen.
I'm trying to find some scissors. They can't open the evidence. Who took the scissors, guys?
Permission to approach the witness room.
This court is in Santa Cruz County. What county is Phoenix in? I don't think it's the same county. We're way south, way south. Do you see how quick he put those gloves on? He's done this before.
Permission, Your Honor, for the witness to step down to review the exhibit.
Like the cameraman's prepped.
Oh, you did. You anticipated. Rick, I want you to take a look at what's in Government Exhibit 101. What do you see in there?
Exhibit 101 was the rifle that I examined in this case.
Do you recognize, like, the strap? Recognize certain features, the strap, things like that about the rifle?
Well, the main feature is the evidence tape that I placed on it during my exam. It has my initials and date on it.
All right, I'm gonna walk us through how you measure operability and the functionality of the weapon when you review it. You can pick it up, yeah. Permission. Thank you.
So in my right hand is the AK pattern rifle that I mentioned, State 101. And it is a semi-automatic gas-operated rifle, meaning that as the weapon is fired, there's a gas assistance. So as the gas is generated by the exploding cartridge, it helps cycle the action. And I'll talk about what the cycling is. So cartridges are loaded in a box magazine. We have one, and it's inserted in the base here. And then the operator will pull this handle, the bolt, the charging handle, to the rear, release it, and that will strip a cartridge off of the magazine into the chamber, and now it's ready to fire. When the trigger is pulled, and safety is off, the cartridge will go down, the bullet will go down the barrel, the cartridge case will...
Object to narrative, and I don't believe it's responsive to the question.
You're asking to explain to...
So as the trigger is pulled, the primer is struck, which we'll talk about, but it's the component of the cartridge that ignites the powder. And as the powder burns, it generates gas that gas expands, creating pressure, and that pressure is what pushes the bullet out the barrel to the target. And then also some of that gas helps cycle the action, meaning there's a tube that pushes the bolt to the rear, which helps extract and eject that fired cartridge case. The bolt comes forward again, stripping a new cartridge off of the magazine into the chamber, and that process will happen as fast as you can pull the trigger. This is semi-automatic, meaning for each trigger pull, one shot is fired. So if you held the trigger down on this particular rifle, it would just fire one time. It is not a machine gun, but it is based off a machine gun design.
And how big of a magazine does that weapon hold?
They're typically 30-round magazines, but you can get different,
larger ones,
different numbers of cartridges for different sizes of magazines.
Is there sighting on that weapon?
There is. There's a rear sight here, has a button that can be adjusted. And so again, this is a military type rifle, so occasionally you might want to do, say, suppressive fire at a longer range. So you can move this ladder sight for your different ranges that you might shoot.
And is there a rear sight?
That is the
that
rear
is the rear
sight.
sight. There's a front sight.
Wasn't
Yes, like
tracking there. Sorry about that. And anything else about the weapon that's noteworthy for the jury?
Not necessarily. This is a pretty standard AK pattern rifle that I would expect to see in the laboratory.
Does that look about the same condition that you had it when you tested it when you came to Arizona?
It does. All these black straps that you see holding the action in place are ones that I put there after I examined it.
Right. You can get that done. And you can go ahead and go back.
kept it safely pointed down the entire time. Appreciate that. Didn't have a rust reenactment.
Do you recall when you came to Arizona to test that gun?
I do recall, yes.
When was it?
Oh, it was 7/7 of 23.
So that's July 7th of last year?
Yes.
He says yes so energetically. He's excited to be here. There's no scope.
Warmer here in July than in Seattle, right?
It was uncomfortably warm when I was here.
You also looked at some ammunition, right?
I did.
You used some ammunition, correct?
I used ammunition and evidence for the test firing.
Did you compare, so you used, there's two different sets of ammunition I want to talk about. Well, I'm sorry, ammunition and there's some shell casings, right? I want to keep these two things separate.
Okay.
Am I getting it right? I'm getting it right.
Yes, the shell casings would be what's left after the bullet's gone down range, and typically the fired cartridge case is what we call it, would be around where the shooter was. So it's automatically extracted and ejected, like I previously mentioned, so it kind of lands on the ground somewhere where the shooter was, and bullet is downrange. So a cartridge case would be fired, ammunition would be unfired with the bullet still in the case.
Just 1 second, Ron, I'm grabbing it.
AKs are very good at just working. I wouldn't put them up in the highest accuracy of guns, but they're very good at spraying lead down range.
Do you recall the manufacturer of the ammunition that you reviewed, that you used?
Well, the manufacturer is stamped onto the base of the cartridge case. And in this case, it stated Wolf, W-O-L-F, and that is a common manufacturer of this type of ammunition.
And you also reviewed some, you got that from the Sheriff's Department?
I did.
Do you remember what exhibit, what item number it was?
I'd have to check my report.
Go ahead and refresh your recollection, look at your report.
The ammunition I used was item number 5, J as in John, A as in Adam.
So I want to just show you. Actually, I'm gonna have you, you don't still have your gloves on, do you? I don't do it.
He used up his gloves. Get him some more ones. Maybe some pink gloves, so we can do the whole hot hands thing. Makes it easier to see the evidence.
Sure, it's been part of Exhibit 101. show you an envelope for 101. We'll give you a glove so you can open that up. Can you do two things at once as you're opening it up?
I can.
Those show, you're going to be opening up an envelope there. It's going to have some items in there. Those items, did you put any items in the box when you finished your analysis and testing?
I did not. I resealed my test back in the packaging that the ammunition came from.
Okay. I want you to open that up.
Okay, it's opened.
Take a peek inside. Do you recognize what's inside?
These appear to be test fires from the rifle 101.
What's those are shell casings?
Yes, just fired cartridge cases.
All right, and approximately how many are in there?
I'll have to count them. Can we count them?
Sure, you can count them real quick.
More than two. Looks like 10.
10. And are those the shell casings similar to the ones found on the scene in this case?
They are. They are 7.62 by 39 caliber Wolf brand cartridge cases.
And those are the ones that you used to test this weapon?
I used that same type to test this firearm.
I see the benefit of using a bigger table here. I'm going to show you in Government Exhibit 34. I'll show you image 4434. Just for, well, it's going to be. You see that image? Can we zoom in?
I can't see it.
He has to authenticate it before we
What does that look like?
see
What
it.
image does that look like?
Well, just based on my training experience and knowing what this is, it's
not
likely
where we
a
zoom in.
7.62 by 39 caliber cartridge case.
This cameraman, no, that's not where we're allowed
Show
to
you
zoom
image
into.
4435. Same thing?
Yes, 4435 appears to be also a 7.62 by 39 caliber cartridge case.
And those match or similar to the ones in the envelope, right?
Yes, appear to be same caliber, cartridge type, and make of the casing itself.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as, and you reviewed crime scene photos, correct?
I did.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as same exhibit 34, but image 4438. Recognize that?
I do.
Maybe publish for the jury. I can, on agreement with counsel.
Objection.
And just, it's subject to the stipulation that we talked about earlier today.
You want me to talk to the jury any more about that, or do you want just to?
I think that'd be helpful. To just explain to the jury.
Okay. All right, so this is next. This is what I was talking to you about before, taking a witness out of order. Now, remember also, we talked about any exhibit that comes into evidence that the court admits
Judge's
has
mic
to
is
be
off.
what we call foundation. So witnesses got to come in and testify to establish that whatever the item is relevant to this case. So, for example, if there's a, I'm just making this up, okay? This is not in this case. If there's a bullet found or a casing found, you know, this witness is about to testify to his opinion about some of that. Someone's got to come in. Someone's got to come in and say, that was a bullet or casing or whatever that was found at the scene of this alleged crime, not just some random bullet or casing that they found. So that's foundational. That's an example of foundation. Someone's got to come in and testify. Whatever this gentleman's going to testify to is something that relates to this case, like the casing that was found at the scene.
And we're not going to do that.
So in order to get this gentleman on and make sure we finish his testimony so he can get on his way this afternoon or today, there's an agreement we call a stipulation. We had a preliminary instruction about that. A stipulation is nothing more than agreement between the parties, state and defense, that this witness can be taken out of order and that this, what's now going to be portrayed to you, there has been no foundation yet established to it as to what it is and where it was taken. But the defense has agreed with the state that we can take this gentleman out of order, but there will be required to be a witness who will come in at a later time to establish that foundation, which is usually established before the witness testifies. Okay? Good enough?
Yes.
Any questions about that? Thank you. All right. You can go forward. It can be published. This is Exhibit 34, page 4438. Is that correct? All right.
What are we seeing here, Rick?
What you're seeing in this photograph is the documentation of the fire cartridge cases that were ultimately collected as evidence.
I'm gonna go back to, believe it or not, that was the very first one I wanted to show. I'm gonna go back to images 4434 and 4435. That's the image we just saw together, right?
Yes.
Right, and you still have the envelope in front of you, right?
I do.
So you got your gloves on?
I do.
All right. Can you hold up one of the shell casings in that envelope? Do like a little thing like that for everyone. And Your Honor, can you just stand up a little bit so you can walk the perimeter there? Sure.
Cameron's tempted to follow, but don't. Wait for him to get in frame. There we go. Showing the spent casing.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Vanna. I mean, Rick. Great job.
And that shell casing is similar to the one in 4434.
It is.
Just so, because I talked about this one too. I showed you 4435. That one too, right?
Yes.
The stipulation between the state and the prosecution is basically the foundation could be laid after this witness instead of before. It's out of order. It's strange, but they agreed to it.
4436.
4436 also appears to be a 7.62 by 39 caliber cartridge case.
Just one more of those. I'm going to zoom in.
I can see it.
You see it? You can draw on that screen. You want to circle it, top left-hand corner to activate it, and then you can put a circle around where it's at. There's a little stylus there.
Let's call in tech support for training, quick training session.
No problem. Can I just point it to you, Rick?
Sure.
Is this the image right there?
It is.
Okay, so it's the bottom left of that image, right?
Like the 9 o'clock position of that photograph.
That's a fair way to describe it. 9 o'clock position.
We're looking at gravel in the 9 o'clock position. Yeah, we'll get testimony about the officer who actually found these and the condition they were in, why he thinks they were recent fires, the caliber. We'll get all that testimony later. Yay! Got it figured out. Right behind his head. Tech support's there training the witness. It's like showing him all the features. We just need the pen. We just need the pen to work.
I think we got it. Thank you.
All that teaching now, and he's going to take it away from you. Do you know approximately how many shell casings there were found on scene?
I think there are ultimately 9.
Just so I can show the 4439 again. Those shell casings we just saw in those images, they're from this scene, right?
Yes.
And what are those little yellow things? Just little tents, what are those?
Those are pretty standard evidence markers that I see in most of my crime scenes.
They're just marking where the casings are found, right?
Yes, and there's photographic scales on them for taking photographs with measurements in them.
Show you 44, same exhibit 34, image 4440. Different image of what we just saw?
Yeah, 4440 appears to be the same image, just a different location, or same area, just taken from a different perspective.
We're going to do a close-up, a real close-up here. What you see on, this is exhibit 34, image 4442. What do you see on there?
4442 appears to be another photograph of a fired 7.62 by 39 millimeter cartridge case.
And just so we have a point of reference, you see the number 1 on there?
I do.
You see the number 1 on the screen?
I do.
Okay. It's a closer shot with someone's hand. You see that?
Yes.
I'm keeping an eye on the Hannah Gutierrez situation. As that hearing has started, I'll let you know as things happen. But right now, that's Morrissey.
I'm just going to do one more for the illustrative. Images.
Talking about the issue.
4444.
So I'm watching that one.
You see that image?
I do. 4444 is another fired cartridge case.
With the marking number 2 next to it?
Yes.
And all those showcases, these showcases you're seeing match the one that's in that envelope, right?
Appear to be the same type and caliber.
When you came down to Arizona, your goal was to check the operability and the functionality of the weapon?
Yes.
Explain to the jury what that entailed.
Simply examining it and test firing it. And part of the examination is to look for defects or alterations to the firearm. Of course, any safety concerns of firing the firearm, and ensuring that the magazine fits in chambers and cycles properly.
Recall any functionality issues with the weapon?
No.
Any defects with the weapon?
No.
In your opinion, did it operate as intended?
It did.
And you test fired that weapon?
I did.
And how'd you, what goes into the test firing of the weapon?
Pretty simple. After my examination, I checked the board to be sure there's no obstructions inside the barrel, because that could be bad. And I had ammunition there from evidence, so I used that. I used the magazine from evidence and test fired like anyone would fire a firearm.
And with this weapon, when you tested it, how far were you away when you tested it?
I did set up some panels a little over 100 yards away to shoot at, so I have a target base. And those shots were fired from a rest, meaning the stand that I placed the firearm in, and everything functioned properly.
Why'd you pick a little bit over 100 yards?
Well, I knew that was the approximate distance of question here, and I also wanted to see if the bullet was stable in flight at that range. And that's something I've seen, especially some of the AK pattern rifles, is they're fired so many times that the rifling are spiral cuts in the barrel to give the bullet stability in flight, like a football. And if that rifling is damaged or altered or corroded, it affects the flight of the bullet. So that was one of the things that I wanted to test while I was here. Was that bullet stable at that distance? Meaning, is it making nice, clean holes into my target?
I'm just going to show you, it's going to be marked as government exhibits 74 and 103 to 110. And I want you to do you have scissors still up there?
I do.
Do you have your glove on still? Yeah, learning. Thanks, Rick.
I am learning.
Permission to approach her? You mind opening up Government Exhibit 74?
Inside 74 is another envelope. You want me to open that one?
I do. Thank you. Thank you, Rick.
'74 was marked item 1, J as in John, A as in Adam. And inside that second envelope is a fired cartridge.
Can you put it up?
Appears to be, well, it is 7.62 by 39 millimeter fired cartridge case with the wolf head stand.
I know you can't talk about it, but does that look like a similar image of one of the rounds or spent shell casings in the images we saw?
It appears to be the same caliber and type.
Okay. I'm not going to ask you to do all of these, but open up exhibit 10. There's a bigger envelope that says 103 to 106. Just open that package up, and I just want you to just look at it. Just give me one of those in there, and we'll do the same thing with just one of those in there. Oh, does that make sense? Does that make sense?
I said, okay, yes. Oh, got you. So Stacy exhibit 103 to 106 was my item numbers for the purposes of my report. 22JA, 23JA, 24JA, and 25JA.
take them off. Sorry. Which one are you going to show me?
So the envelope I pulled out was 105.
Can you just open up 105 for me? Oh, I'm sorry. Is it open?
Yes.
Take it out and show it to the jury for me. And what does that look like?
This is another 7.62 by 39 fired cartridge case with wolf headstand.
And I know you can't testify to this because you weren't there, but does that look like one of the same rounds that was in the images I showed you?
Appears to be the same caliber and cartridge type.
Very man, collect. Can you put 105 back in that bigger envelope? Permission to check that. Go back up.
Judge just denied Mr. Bull's motion for Hannah getting a new trial.
So I just want to make sure we all understand the
Just give me the
sequence of events
explanation
we
right
just
now.
went through. The shell casings that were located with State Exhibit 101, the spent shell casings. Got that in your head?
Yes.
Do they match the ones that we just saw in Government Exhibit 74? And I think you looked at Government Exhibit 105.
Yes, they all appear to be Wolf brand 7.62 by 39 millimeter fired cartridge cases.
And those appear to match the ones on photographs.
Well, match means something different to me than to you.
I'm sorry.
They appear to be similar in make and model.
Thanks for clarifying. Appear to be similar. When you fired the Government Exhibit 101, which is the AK, I'm just going to call it the AK. Okay. When you fired the AK, you testified no functionality issues, correct?
Correct.
No operation issues.
Correct.
And did the projectile come out of the gun in the intended fashion?
It did.
Straight?
Yes.
And just so I understand, this weapon and those projectiles, you looked at autopsy pictures, right?
I do.
You also looked at clothing pictures of the victim.
I did.
I'm going to show you Government Exhibit 14.2, image 6350, under the same conditions as before with defense. I'll show us first so defense can see what I'm showing.
And for the record, again, same, I guess, deferred objection pending foundation.
Move to publish for the jury. You see, let me zoom out. What's this an image of?
This image is a photograph taken by a medical examiner, as I believe it to be, the entrance wound.
Anything unique about that entrance room considering this weapon and those projectiles?
That's an irregular entrance wound. Sorry, content warning.
Appears to be irregular, not circular.
Is it helpful to draw why it's irregular versus circular?
Sure, I'll drop to the side, but
It's an oblong entrance wound instead of a perfect circle, which would indicate that the projectile was tumbling or not.
for the drawing here, but I'm looking for a clean circular hole.
Right.
And this is not. We call it an irregular hole, and this is not. We call it an irregular hole or oval shaped defect.
And you also looked at the clothing of the victim, correct?
Yes.
And you saw the entry room or the entry hole of the victim's clothing.
Yes, the bullet defect in the victim's clothing.
And was there anything special about the entry hole of the victim's clothing?
As with the autopsy photo, the clothing also exhibited irregular type defect.
just so this is in your report, I just want to show you the image that you looked at. You also looked at some of the clothing, but this is one of the images that you looked at, right?
Yes.
Right. And do you recall where the entry was on this photo?
That's identified.
Oh, sorry about that. Exhibit 35, image 028.
And this photograph photograph the decedent as he was located, and you were asking about the entrance.
Yeah, do you recall?
The right flank, meaning the right side.
On the cage, do a little picture thing. Here. Where all the staining is at, right?
Yes, where blood deposition is.
Okay, so
I understand
the Hannah hearing's over.
That gun,
no new trial,
projectiles,
and she's not going to be released pending sentencing. I don't know the sentencing date yet.
From 100 plus yards.
In my opinion, yes.
And the design, talked about this, the design of that projectile. What's the purpose of that projectile, design of that projectile?
The 7.62 by 39 cartridge is a military cartridge, as I mentioned earlier. And military cartridges are designed not to fragment, meaning they're full metal jackets. And the idea being, and again, this is historic, but from my understanding, the idea being for that is if you wound someone on the battlefield, it takes two people to take that person off the battlefield. And so the idea is you want the bullet to perforate, meaning go all the way through the target, and that's what these cartridges are designed to do. Whereas your law enforcement type of bullets are designed to enter and not exit, meaning expand and deposit all their energy into the target. So there's lots of classes, but there's two major classes of bullets that I see: full metal jackets or ball ammo like we're seeing here, and then jacketed hollow points or soft points, which are designed to fragment in the body.
And from a little bit over 100 yards away, using the AK and those rounds, what would you expect to happen with this projectile hitting a body?
Unless it hit a major structure like the spine, I would expect it to enter and exit, meaning perforate the body.
Let me go back to is there a technical term for what's happening with this round as it enters the body?
Oh, I thought I used a technical term.
Is there a technical term for
Well,
it?
it's an irregular instrument. So one term could be used if the bullet's in yaw, meaning it's not stable. It's flying irregularly. And so one example of that would be ricochet sound you hear in the movies. That's a bullet in yaw. As it's spinning through the air, it's making a whirring sound because it's not stable, it's not flying straight. So that's one of the technical terms we use to describe potentially the bullet behavior going here, that the bullet is in yaw and not flying straight.
And so your opinion is this entry wound is created by a bullet in yaw.
Well, what causes a bullet to be in yaw could be an intermediate object. So I published a paper and actually presented on this very topic where a bullet would strike something even slightly, and that impact would create the yaw, meaning knock the bullet out of its stable flight that it has. And I think, in my opinion, I think that's what's occurring here.
And you fired this weapon, right? So without anything interfering from the weapon to the target, right? Nothing in between.
I did. When I fired it, I did not impact any intermediate objects, intentionally.
Yeah. Any yaw?
No, all of my witness panels that I fired, my targets, all had clean holes or defects, meaning the bullet was stable.
And you're familiar with this scene here, right? You're familiar with the topography, the trees and landscapes?
I am. I did look at the scan data.
And are there things in this scene that can create yaw of a bullet that's been fired?
I would say not several, but many mesquite trees. They were at the scene that I saw on the point cloud and on the crime scene photos and on the drone footage to indicate that, yes, there's many objects between the house and the decedents.
And so explain to the jury if a bullet fired from this weapon, that round, from that distance, if it hits a trunk, it's going to stop the bullet, right? If it hits a trunk?
Tree trunk or car trunk?
Oh, good question. Tree trunk.
Yes, or a branch. I mean, anything that could, again, just deviate it from its flight.
In this bullet, with the velocity it has, it can go through a branch. It can go through, obviously, twigs or things like that, right?
Yes.
But any of those things can cause a yaw.
Yes.
And it would still continue on its flight path, right?
Generally, it depends on how destabilizable it is, how much it will deviate from the flight path.
So the state wants it both ways here.
And when you
I'll explain that when I get a second.
Say K-47, do you recall the citing and what was cited for?
Well, as I stated, that you can adjust that rear sight with a little button you push it and it slides the rear sight up and down. And there's a P setting, which is the general purpose setting. I forgot what the P stands for, it's in another language. But typically, my understanding is it's a 300-yard zero, meaning it should be point aim, point of impact at 300 yards. But again, that's up for debate depending on the rifle and how it's set up.
So that as you received it and as you tested that weapon was sighted for 300 yards.
It had the P, it was in the P setting when I looked at it, yes. By me, I had a question. Could this injury, go back, I don't know why I did that. This injury, could it be what we call bullet fall? You know what bullet, am I using a layman's way of explaining that? This is something I explored in my 800-yard case, and in my opinion, no, this could not be bullet fall.
What's bullet fall, so we can explain?
So there's an angle for which you can fire a rifle or a pistol that would be the maximum range, meaning gravity versus velocity of the bullet. And so most firearms, it's about 33, 35 degrees. So if you hold it 35 degrees, it's going to go to the maximum distance that it can. If you go beyond 30 degrees, it's going to run out of velocity and then it's going to start falling. And it's going to lose its velocity. So I did extensive testing on that. And there's published papers on this too when I had my 800-yard case. And so a falling bullet only is about 180 feet per second, about enough to, I mean, if you shot it straight in the air and it came down, it's about enough to give you a knot on your head or a bruise on your shoulder. It typically won't, if it penetrates, it'll be very superficial because it's just the velocity that it has is just from gravity as it's falling. And so anything beyond 30, 40, 50 degrees, it's going to be a falling bullet and not velocity from the shot itself. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, so when you look at that wound, is this, I just to make sure I understand. When you look at that wound, look at this weapon, and look at the shell casings and the rounds projectile used, is this a result of a bullet fall, or is this a result of a weapon, the projectile being still on its trajectory at full velocity?
It's my opinion that this was a direct fire shot and not a falling bullet.
You also gave an opinion about whether or not this was a possible handgun or a close range shot. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Walk the jury through what your opinion is about whether or not this is a close range shot or a long shot.
Possible handgun.
Well, the two things we're looking for a close range shot. One, I mentioned earlier that there is
stippling,
rapidly expanding gas that pushes the bullet down the barrel. Or that gas has to go somewhere. So it usually follows and sometimes precedes the bullet as it comes out of the barrel. So that gas has residue that can be chemically tested. There's also unfired gunpowder that's contained within that gas cloud. And if you're close enough, that will deposit itself on the target, the clothing, the wound, etc. And so we can test for that. Secondly, we have an irregular wound, and we know that this firearm fires straight bullets. So something would have had to come in between the shooter and the victim to destabilize that bullet in the path that it would take. So those would be the two things that we would look for a close range shot.
Okay,
additionally, a pistol round.
For this to hold up, there has to be some object.
When unstable pistol rounds hit people, they don't exit because they lose all their energy as they are unstable flying through the air. Now, this being a military cartridge, much higher velocity, much smaller bullet, so it can be unstable and still manage to perforate a person. So all of those factors, again, it was my opinion, it was a distance shot from a rifle.
It's sound logic there.
You had that one case earlier, 800 yards away, approximately.
Yes.
Did that bullet exit the victim in that case?
It did not. It penetrated around her armpits and went through her heart and almost exited on her left side.
So distance does matter whether or not there's enough velocity for this type of bullet to enter and then exit.
Certainly, and it did lose, obviously, some velocity traveling 800 yards, but still was lethal at that distance.
And you're, in this scenario, in this case, that distance, 100, a little bit over 100 yards, was enough, it's short enough distance for that gun, for that round to penetrate and exit.
Yes.
And in your opinion, it was a long rifle that shot that round that killed this victim.
The wound is consistent to a rifle round.
May I also ask you, you considered the ejection pattern? Did you review the ejection pattern that the DPS did in this case?
I did.
And they did their own testing of the weapon, right?
Yes.
And you reviewed that ejection pattern?
I did, and I saw a similar ejection pattern, although I didn't map it when I was doing my own test firing.
So essentially, we have three possible ejection patterns. We've got the crime scene, we've got DPS, and we have yours.
Yes.
All right. All three of those ejection patterns, are they similar using this weapon?
Well, I'm not sure where the shooter was specifically. So, when we do our testing, we know right where the firearm is versus the pattern. But the pattern size was similar in all three areas. It's some dispersion and typically to the right of the firearm, and that's been my experience with these types of firearms.
This is bad science. You're basically working with a random number generator and saying, yes, all the numbers that came up were between 1 and 10 million, so they match. You're looking at where the bullet casings fall out of the gun as they're ejected, as they're shot, and you have nothing to go on. And you're looking at a rocky surface and you're saying, yeah, that's about the same as what we had here. It's terrible, terrible science. There's so many variables at play, wind, everything else. You know, how they were holding the gun, if they had clothing on that it bounced off of. It's terrible. Okay, and to say that this was a match because of what the shell casing sort of fell in the same size area. If anything, you say I could guess that the shooter was outside this circle, and that's about it.
Here. I'll show you what's been marked. Stay exhibit 34, image 4440. You see that, Rick?
Yes.
And that is, would that be so much like an ejection pattern? These are, just so all understand what we're looking at, these are markings, yellow markings, right?
Yes.
And I know you were not here, but assuming those markings are with spent shell casings, right?
Yes.
if someone's standing, you see where the detectives are? If someone's standing to the 3 o'clock side to that, you see the 3 o'clock? Can you just draw on the map 3 o'clock where the shell casings are on the far side of the photo? Yeah, something like that, right? Somewhere close to that range, right? But those shell casings, that ejection pattern be conducive, be what we would possibly see from someone standing in that position firing that weapon?
Yes, could be.
And it's like brick and patio, do you see that? You see where the detectives are standing or the officers are standing?
I do.
And you don't know this, but that looks like a patio deck, right?
It is a patio deck. I've looked at the 3D scanning, and I'm familiar with the area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you understand we're referencing to cones? Do you ever seen cones or seeing on a 3D scan?
Yes.
And the jury has seen cones. They've seen plenty of photos with cones in it. And so we're talking about the cones on the patio deck, right?
Yes.
And if a shooter is standing at that location, firing that weapon with those rounds, would this be?
Would this be a possible pattern?
An ejection pattern that you could see that could result.
It is consistent.
Yeah, I want to talk about this a little bit. Hopefully, we got a break here soon.
Where'd you get for your 3D scan? Where'd you get the data for that 3D scan?
Arizona DPS did the scanning, and the process for that is essentially a magic box on a stick on a tripod, and you put it out.
I think he's answered the questions.
He did.
A magic box.
Did you also get like a
on
scan
stick?
plan? Did they tell you? Did they give you a scan plan for that or no?
I did the scan plan and provided it to them.
No, they did with DPS when they provide you the raw data.
Yes.
They provide you any documentation to go with it.
All I wanted was the raw data so I could register it myself.
And you prepared the output for the 3D scan.
Yes.
What was the distance for your 3D scan? What was the distance from the patio, from the cone, to where the victim's body was found?
It was consistent with the measurement that the drone had already measured. So I just confirmed that measurement.
Would 350 feet sound familiar?
Yes.
Before I get to my final few questions, so with the ejection pattern, the type of weapon, the rounds, can we just call them wolf rounds? Can I just say wolf?
Sure.
Wolf rounds. The wound and the clothing, what's your opinion about where the shooter was in this case?
Well, all the evidence I looked at is consistent with the shooter standing on that porch, or that, based on the physical evidence that I looked at that I'm aware of, the shot could have come from the porch.
Just 1 second, Your Honor.
This possibility, the shot could have come from the porch. Okay, I want to give you an analogy on this. Hopefully we've got just a minute. That's a weak, first of all, that's a weak conclusion from an expert. Could have. This is not a beyond reasonable doubt type situation. It's like, well, if you roll the dice, if you roll, 50 20-sided dice, it's possible to get all 20s. That's a possibility. That hurts. I'm sorry. Okay, looks like they're done here. Maybe break time. It's a definite maybe.
Almost done, Rick. I have to show you something. But it wasn't with my. He's a witness. Yeah. We're having an item brought in. One of the shell casings that you use to get the lot number and so forth.
Okay.
As you're getting that, Rick, so The round that entered the victim's body and exited, do you know what happened to it?
To my knowledge, it was not recovered.
Then may we have a quick pitch conference?
The great rushing of waters happens again. Here, this is the magic box being delivered. Magic box on a stick. How do you get a scan of a crime scene? There's a magic box on a stick, and somebody says the magic words. They wave the wand, and then data comes out. I'm going to add a magic show to the crime scene because that was not.
We'll take a 30-minute recess. I'll stay for the lawyers.
Okay, we're going to hear some of this discussion.
We rise before.
As the jury leaves, so let me tell you, this ejection pattern they're talking about with the firearm, there is some science you can get from that. You can say because the shell landed over here, there's a good chance the shooter was on this side because the gun ejects the bullets a certain direction. You can do that. But to look at ejection pattern on the ground and say, yep, there are bullets, casings scattered on the ground, and when I shot the gun, there were also casings scattered on the ground, thus it's right, would be equivalent to saying, look, I have a lottery ticket right here with these random numbers on a lottery ticket right here with these random numbers. So it is possible to say the same person filled out these lottery tickets. Okay, you can't reverse back this one. It's just so many variables.
You can step out.
Sorry, I get upset about that.
All right, tell me
What are we doing?
Your Honor, I know the court ordered no projection of the jurors, and I just had some folks advise me that they're watching the live feed and that there are jurors that are being projected on the live feed.
People from your office.
Where?
Who's the
My
source?
investigator advised me that he received the information. I can have him come in and tell you where he received the information if you'd like.
I think this was from yesterday. I didn't see a juror today. Was there a juror yesterday? That brief little blip.
My investigator's telling me that an investigator from our office, David Batt, called to indicate that the live feed was showing the two jurors.
We know.
Or I don't know how many jurors?
I don't know how many jurors that there were supposed to be going to send here.
Do you know which ones?
No, sir.
Would you like me to call over to the office to find out, Your Honor? I don't have a text.
This was yesterday, I'm thinking.
My phone and I'll show you the text.
I can call the David Batt if you'd like, Your Honor. I didn't get any additional information. I just thought the court might have to.
It was. I think it was yesterday. We caught that moment, or the day before.
Who's in charge of the pool camera for today? Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot. I'm sure you're aware of the rules, right?
Yes.
That we can't take any video, show anything that shows the identity of the jurors. Anything you want to tell me?
Well, there was a moment where I was panning and I was not fully paying attention, and I just briefly saw, and they were blurred out, a couple jurors right here. And the moment I noticed, I panned back. And when it happened, I was like, oh gosh. And I was like, okay, I need to pay more attention because I know that's a rule and I didn't mean to do it. I apologize.
All right, thank you. Well, I don't think there's anything you can do about that. This person who's operating the camera is well aware of the rules. She explained what happened. She's got to be very careful.
It was unintentional.
It doesn't happen again.
When the cameraman says blurred out, means probably not in focus. I missed it. It was worse yesterday, I think.
Does anyone want me to inform the two jurors that their identity might have been shown? I mean, anyone can come into the courthouse and court and see the jurors.
Yeah, it is sort of silly that we do this, honestly.
That it's accessible.
State doesn't think that's necessary at all, Your Honor, but we defer to the court. I just know that was the court's order. I just wanted to make sure the camera folks knew that they were having an issue. Sounds like she already knew. So.
Right, I agree. They know the rules, and they're absolutely adhere to the rules. It's a one-time incident. It just happened once.
Just once, and when I saw it happen, I was like, oh gosh, nope, I need to pay more attention. I apologize.
I'm sorry. Thank you for your apology, and thank you for being,
the candor.
So upfront with us about what happened. But the camera person knows what has to be done, and it was a one-time thing where you swung the camera a couple millimeters or something too far to the right.
This was
yeah, it was when I was trying to film the person on the stand. Yes, I was just like panning over, and I just went just a little too far.
And I don't know if it happened when he gets down. Just when he gets down, just walk across, or any other witness gets down, just don't follow.
Don't follow.
All right.
Wait, that's what we
Any
said.
other record anyone wants to make? Okay, so we'll come back in let's make it about 20 minutes.
Okay. Good. All good. I don't think the judge is concerned. Dock the pay. No. These things do happen. Part of the problem, I'll call this right now. Part of the problem is the positioning of the camera, and the court is the one that chooses that. The court chooses where the camera can set up, and they set up so they're shooting over the corner.
I messed up. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, we're gonna listen to her. She owned up, but the court chose the spot. The court chooses the spot and says you shoot over the corner of the jury box. So if the jurors lean forward, they're in the frame, and so you're allowed to show certain things. And she's trying to follow that as best she can. It was so fast. Her response was pretty good. You're going to see her be very cautious from here on forward. Okay. Where the rest trial, camera person would have been chastised and banned from the courtroom. Going back to the rest trial, let me see if I can bring this up really quickly. I want to show you what happened just at the end of that trial. There were a couple parts to what happened in the rest trial, and we're going to see if we can bring this in just to get you guys up to speed. This hearing today was over the fact that there was a case that went on appeal up to the Supreme Court, I believe it was in Arizona or New Mexico, and they the ruling came down that the instructions to the jury had to be a certain way when you have multiple options, and it's a little bit complex. The defense, Mr. Bowles, apparently didn't do a really good job describing the situation to the court, but the court shot it down in a heartbeat. So we're going to listen just to the final couple minutes of this, and this is going to be where are we at? Right here. So we're just going to go right here and play. Hopefully this will work properly. Okay.
All right, thank you, counsel. So I do agree that your motion was very sparse, and it just focused, your motion for a new trial was very sparse, and it just focused on the and/or, and because we had a jury instruction in and/or, Ms. Gutierrez was entitled to a new trial. It wasn't until your reply where you fleshed out issues that you had already stated regarding the unanimity aspect of things. I have read
everything.
Taylor. I've read Gaudet. I've read Consul. I've read very many cases. I'm very aware of what occurred at trial. I'm very aware of the discussions that occurred on regarding the jury instructions. And I am denying your motion, Mr. Bowles, because I do not think that Taylor requires a new trial. In this case, I think that the issues in this case, the jury instruction in this case, are distinguishable from what happened in Taylor. I'm going to provide a written order outlining my reasons so that there's no misstatements of what I'm to make an oral determination. So I'm going to do a written order, but I wanted to let you know that I'm denying your motion for a new trial. I will put it in an order. You should get that on Monday, and we are staying the course on the sentencing.
And then he goes for the second part. So sentencing is still on track.
I had one additional request to the court in my motion, which was
you're going to see Hannah right at the very end of this.
To address this at sentencing or to address it now, which was to consider release of Ms. Gutierrez-Reed pending an appeal and a writ that we would take for guidance from the appeals court and Supreme Court. And I just wanted to add to that, she didn't have any violations pending trial. She takes care of her father, who has been diagnosed with leukemia. She works, and she has been in counseling. So she hasn't done anything wrong. She's not a danger or a flight risk. And I think there's an appellate issue that we have stated that we will raise, and a
He's saying we're
potential
going over
Supreme
your
Court
head.
writ. And I just think it's unfair if there's any chance of the Court of Appeals or Supreme Court seeing it differently, that she served her whole sentence on the chance that it could be reversed.
Okay, so let me pause here just for a second. What she's saying is we want to let her out pending what we plan on doing because we don't like your agreement. We're going to take this. We don't like your decision. We're going to take this to a higher court. We're going to appeal your decision here and possibly appeal that to the Supreme Court if we have to. But that's going to take so much time that Hannah would possibly be serving her entire sentence before the case is heard by the court. And he says, and if the court sides with Hannah and says, yeah, this was wrong, she does deserve a new trial, she's already served her sentence because it's such a short sentence. And so he's saying, let her out in the meantime, based on the fact that we are appealing this.
So I'm just asking the court to consider that based on all those grounds and the fact that she hasn't had any violations.
Ms. Marcy.
Well, we do oppose Ms. Gutierrez's release. If this were like a motion to review conditions of release, I certainly would have been able to address my concerns with regard to Ms. Gutierrez and potential release. I'm opposed to it. Does the court want me to go into, I mean, I actually asked Mr. Bowles for proof of Ms. Gutierrez's employment history during the time that the case was pending and any counseling and treatment that she has completed or participated in. To date, I don't believe he's provided me anything. So while Mr. Bowles wants to make these statements to the court this morning, these are things that I requested from Mr. Bowles, I think, over a week ago. I did it almost immediately after the trial so that I could be thoughtful in terms of coming up with a sentencing recommendation at the sentencing on April 15th, and I've received absolutely nothing. In terms of Ms. Gutierrez's full compliance with her conditions of release, I think there are some arguments to be made there if the court wants me to make them now.
Court doesn't need them.
The jury found Ms. Gutierrez Reed guilty. She is incarcerated at this point. She's facing incarceration time. Keep in mind, there was a death that the jury determined was caused by her. So I am not releasing her. All right. Thank you. We are in recess.
And here's Hannah. Ready? Wait just for a second. Wait just for a second. You're going to see just a brief moment. I'll try to pause it. Boom. There's Hannah. Hannah participating from her incarceration. A little smirk, a little not happy, but it's less than a second of her on camera, and it's gone. So anyway, that's how the Hannah Gutierrez trial ended. The judge basically reiterating, or the hearing today ended. The judge basically reiterating exactly what she said during the sentence. And let's see, there's the. There's some of her at the beginning. Let's see if we can watch this beginning as well with audio. No audio from her side. She's observer only. But that's Hannah getting prepped for the meeting or participating remotely from the meeting, as it was all a Zoom meeting this morning, or Google Meets. So, all right. That being said, we're trying to keep you up to date on everything that's happening. We've got a couple more minutes before we come back to court here with the Hannah, or excuse me, not the Hannah, but the Mr. Kelly trial right here. There we go. Let's see. We have basically what's going to happen now is, and this is sort of sad because in a way, if Mr. Bowles is right with his filing, if the Supreme Court or the appellate court agrees with Mr. Bowles on his motion for a new trial, Hannah won't get that because it will be a moot point once it finally gets to the court, because the process takes so much time, that it will go there and they're going to say, oh, she's already served her sentence, she's no longer in. You really want a new trial that could, to say that it was right? Or at that point, what good does it do? Why do we have to address this? Because your client's already served her time, she's out. She's working, she's back in the movie industry or wherever she is. So at that point, it's going to be moot, and the court will probably decline to hear it for that reason and not address it. But anyway, let's see. We have a couple moments before court comes back. Let me see. No audio currently right now. She'll have her felony vacated if she wins. I don't see that happening. I think that what we heard, the community as a whole, they were not fond of this. Maybe a new jury might be completely different. I guess they can be. Going back to this trial, though, let's get back on my hobby horse. I'm so frustrated with this witness. Some of what he says is very believable. And his testimony, where he said it's possible that Mr. Kelly stood there at the porch and fired that shot, I think that is believable. It's possible. But I need to see from him, I need to see from this laser scan, I need to see what it looks like. What happens? Show me all the obstructions between where the body was and where the state is saying the defense was. Because at the beginning of the case, remember the pictures they showed, the state got up there, they're like, look, see down there, that dark guy you see standing there above the grass? He's not the tallest guy, but you can see him clearly. It's a clear shot right through there from that porch. It's just like wide open. There's like an alley, right? They're describing that. And now they've had to switch and say, so now take that same position, take that same destination, and now you have to explain why the bullet is not flying straight, why the hole in the body does not match the holes in the targets that our investigator found with this gun, that this gun shoots straight. The bullet, it comes out spinning, and it's like a dart, but it went in sideways when it went into the victim. And now we have to explain that. And now they're having to say the other thing, saying there's lots of stuff. There's a ton of stuff between where we say he shot from and where the victim was found, and that stuff is stuff that could have caused that bullet to start to yaw and start to spin randomly or tumble in the air to say this. So now they've had to say both that there were no obstructions and the shot could be fired, and that there are obstructions and that's why the shot was tumbling. So, oh my goodness. So yeah, they're talking out of both sides of their mouth there a little bit, and it's a little frustrating to hear that happening. The witness, I wonder on cross-examination how hard. First of all, I think the defense is going to go very hard on this witness. That they're going to put the screws to him. He's literally said a couple things that could make it sound. I mean, he's been a little unprofessional in his wording. He's described that he has a day job and then on the side he moonlights doing this. He's like, on my day job I do this, and then this is my own little company on the side I sort of consult. His expert experience, it's not bad, but it's not like, I taught at Quantico for 70 years and I invented guns like we've had in other expert witnesses. So I think defense is going to have some points to chip away at him, and probably if he's unprofessional in some of his responses, like the magic box comments, to the prosecution, to the easy softball questions he's been getting, under pressure, he might fold and give defense a little bit more to work with than they have already. So watch for that on cross to see if it gets spicy and heated there, or even that he sort of flips in his willingness to answer questions and to maybe the defense, as they've been able to do with many other witnesses so far, will get him to be able to testify in things that are helpful to their defense case. The magic box comment, I guess cameras are mysteries, right? No one knows how they work. There's a little box on a stick and things happen. But all right, we should know better than to testify about absolute assumptions when it's junk. That infuriates me. It's not it's not junk science when you talk about, not completely junk science when you talk about ejection patterns, right? But if you were to take rounds from one box of ammunition, say this Wolf ammunition, and take that and load a 30-round magazine and take the gun and lock it down in a vise. Okay, so it's fixed position. You can measure it. It's exactly, what's the height to an average person's shoulder? 5 foot 2 inches off the ground, 5 feet off the ground, and point in this direction. And you have a uniform surface on the ground, and you one at a time you fire around, and then you measure exactly where the bullet landed. And then you pick up that round, you mark it, and then you pick it up so it's not in the way, and then you fire another round. The next round lands somewhere else. It flies differently out of the gun. The angle it flew out of the gun, the distance it flies is different. How it bounced is different. Even like a vacuum chamber, you're going to get a different pattern every time that happens because of little tiny differences in the gun. Little tiny, dirt buildup that slows the action a little bit. A little tiny speck of, unburnt powder or burnt powder that makes the bullet seat a little bit differently against the back of the bolt. All these differences will add up to being a pattern, a broad pattern. And I use the example of the lottery ticket because I think that's the best way to do it. Imagine, I'll say it again because I think that's totally accurate. They're looking at the ground at these 9 spent shell casings, and 3 times they did this, and they're saying, look, there's a circle of spent shell casings. Clearly, that circle looks like this circle, even though they're all in different positions. There's no match. There's no yep, that landed right where we thought it would. Instead, they're taking the lottery ticket and they're saying, we have a lottery ticket that has been filled out for the Powerball, and we know that this lottery ticket was filled out by the defendant, and we have another lottery ticket that's also been filled out by the Powerball. It must have been also filled out by the defendant. And you can't do the math backwards like that. It does not work, especially when you have so many variables that are unknown to the people who are doing the math. Okay, that's my gripe. I'm fired up a little bit. I need defense to come in swinging on this cross-examination because that part is a little frustrating to me. I'm more okay with the firearm, the tool marking testimony than I am about the ejection pattern side. It's fractal chaos, Mr. Fix it. Yes, it's what is it? Those pendulums that swing that are completely random motion pendulums that have all these hinge points. You can't predict what's going to happen next, but you know it's going to happen within a certain area. That's what we have here, and they're using it like science. And it's at least the expert basically his final statement was could have happened, maybe sort of could have. I'm not going to rule out the possibility that it could have been fired from that location. Oh, man. That Mountain Dew is still... I shouldn't have had Mountain Dew on an empty stomach. Math isn't taken into account variables. It's not. And I hope that the defense goes into this a little bit. So, anyway. That being said, we have just a couple moments before we come back from our break. What was the objection? What did the judge? Oh, the cameraman. The cameraman. I think we're going to see more cautious movement of the camera. Honestly, I think the bigger issue, the jury being seen on camera, I honestly think that's sort of silly because anybody can walk into court. You don't need special permission or sign a waiver or anything else. You can walk into court. You can sketch the jurors. You can look at them and recognize them and everything. They can be seen by the public. And here we have this idea that a juror can't show up on camera. Some courts, they fully allow it. And we are literally allowed to hear their names and see them and hear all about them before they go into court. So I think that's a little bit silly. The other part is that I think the cameras, it's more of a problem that the camera is showing the wounds, the victim, the autopsy type photos, because I think there was a ruling about that, that they shouldn't be shown. Anyway, we'll see. All right. Are the defense going to bring their own firearms excerpt? Joey, I don't know if they need to. Probably, but they might be able to get enough out of the state's own expert with his random and sort of weird answers that they don't need to bring their own guy. He might give them everything they need. Mountain Dew with fajitas today. The boys are out of school and hangry. I made an omelet the other day, but I want to have like fried eggs on toast, but we were out of bread, and so I instead got a tortilla and put that on the grill, and I cooked it till it was like just starting to turn brown. So like a big flour tortilla was just starting to turn brown, and then I did a 2-egg omelet, nice and thin, and I mixed in some of that the Flatiron Pepper Company pepper flakes, which was that was so good. Little bit of melted cheese, and cooked a couple slices of deli ham, like smoked ham, and I did the whole thing on. I just stacked it and then ate it. I tried to roll it up, but it was so big. It was like one of those massive street burritos that you get from the taco carts that nobody can fit in their mouth. So I had to eat it with a fork. Anyway, I'm hungry. If anybody wants to know, I should have had breakfast this morning. Didn't have time. Ashley says, everybody talking about lotto tickets so much. I just bought one. Are we cooking lunch? I should. Do you have one of those omelet pans? No, I use a flat Celestial Force. I use a flat grill. But I would love an omelet pan. I think the best pan for cooking an omelet is probably like a wok, right? Because you can just, it's nice and thin. I like omelets to be pretty thin. And then you can just load it up with all the goodies inside and fold it out onto the plate. You're talking yourself into hunger. I might need to take a lunch break right now. Future, I had a feeling the Flatiron Pepper Flakes would be making an appearance when you started talking about food. Okay, for those of you that have tried the Flatiron Pepper Flakes, not a sponsor, but they're so good. I'm almost done. I'm almost out of my last. I've used all the green. I'm almost done with the red bottle. They are the most flavorful spice as far as pepper flakes I have ever seen. If you go back to, I'm sorry, McCormick, I like all your other spices, but if you go back to McCormick red pepper flakes, it will taste like cardboard compared to what you get with the Flatiron pepper flakes. It's good. I'll give you a link if you guys want it. Honestly, I will. They are so good. Oh, they're so good. Hang on just one second. Loud truck going by. It's good on pizza. It's good on mashed potatoes. It's good on an omelet. Here we go. Flatiron pepper. Man, they're so good. These are so good. Hey, did you hear me talking about breakfast? I'm starving. So, I'll send you the link to this one. I think the best flavor is the one that's the green, the Hatch Valley Green Premium Green Chili Flakes. Hatch green chili, jalapeno, and habanero. Very little, very, very little habanero. So it's, come on, computer. Apparently it doesn't work. There it is. There we go. I'm going to list this as best spice ever. There you go. And I have to say that this is an affiliate link, so if you do end up purchasing from Amazon after you click on that link, I think they give me 7 or 8 cents per purchase. You have food already? Food already with what's left of my Flatiron. This is the last of my seasoning. See that little sad little bit? And some chicken strips. Yay. Let's see. Still waiting for court to come back. Babs Austin, thank you. Says if I could only send you all my life questions and receive clear answers, like the one you provided for my inquiry about whether he was the shooter because he admitted to shooting or if he intended to kill. Hugs. Babs, I'll try to answer all I can. Thanks for the generous super chat. Mama Smith, thank you for gifting a membership as well. Let's go back to court here.
All right, we resolved the issue. We've got all the jurors present, counsel, and defendant. Yes, sir. Come on back up. Right, as we take the stand. Go ahead.
Detective Anzik, can you approach and open up what's going to be State Exhibit 1, 2, 3, which is the right one?
Okay, so the magic box is 1, 2, 3.
And Rick, this is your reference to 5J.
Does anyone else find that funny?
In your report.
The ammunition I used?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, so 1, 2, 3. This is the demo. It's 5JA. You didn't have it listed in this one. No, we had to spray up. It's a little bit. Yeah. Your permission for Detective Anzik to approach the witness? Sure.
So is this, go ahead. Is this exhibit 1, 2, 3, or did you say item?
Exhibit 1, 2, 3. And this is still conditioned on the same agreement with defense counsel. So, Mr. Rick, can you look inside that? Detective Anzik, you can step away if you want. Do you have a glove still, Rick? Just, all right, we'll get you. I get you.
Rick is peering deep into the magic box without gloves. He's probably going to get bit by the rabbit, which is about to jump out.
Go ahead. Put your hand in there. What do you see in there?
Yes, exhibit 1, 2, 3 appears to be the ammunition that I used for my test fire.
You can go ahead and take it out.
Okay, so talk about leading. He was already told.
Does that look like the ammunition? Is that actually the ammunition you used?
Yes.
So this is your exhibit. 5JA.
Well, yes, it's the exhibit that I looked at. It's not my exhibit. It's the sheriff's office.
Sorry, but that's the one that you took rounds from to test fire.
Oh, yes, and you can see my evidence tape, green evidence tape.
You signed off on that?
Yeah, I sealed the box with my green evidence tape, and the inner packaging also has my initials and date from 7/7/23.
And you compared the make and model of those rounds to the rounds that DPS used in their testing, right?
Yes.
And you compared those rounds with DPS and then also with the spent shell casings on the crime scene, correct?
Correct.
What's your conclusion about the make and model?
All the same Wolf brand ammunition, 7.62 by 39 millimeter caliber.
So all the testing done in this case from the DPS and from you were using the same make and model Wolf projectile round bullet?
Yes.
Oh, I got it. Permission to approach. I'm going to show you Government Exhibit 102. Yes,
I do.
You want to open that up for me?
Appears to be a magazine and some ammunition.
To what? What are they? Specifically.
There's another one AK-47 type magazine and 7.62 by 39 millimeter caliber cartridges unfired.
Same ones that we just saw in Exhibit 1, 2, 3, right?
Same type.
Same type. And those shell casings, so that round is similar to the shell casings found at the crime scene?
Yes.
And that magazine, you said that was an AK magazine?
Yes.
And if you know, would that AK magazine fit that gun?
It should. I have not tried it.
Okay. And since I'm on the, let me grab that from you. since I'm on the gun, do you know the approximate dimensions of the gun?
Like the total length?
Total length, barrel?
About 34 inches.
And the barrel, do you know?
I didn't measure it specifically, but they're typically about 22, 2 feet long, a little bit less.
Promise you, Rick, I'm almost done. I'm going to show you Government Exhibit 34, image 4193. Under the same conditions with defense. You see that image?
I do.
And we see the little tent, right?
Yes, the evidence marker number 1.
And this is at night, so I'm going to try to get in there.
I'm sorry, I see a picture of a dog. Oh, wait, there's an evidence marker.
You see a vent shell casing in there?
I do.
Can you circle that?
I can.
Is it possible it was moved by the dog?
Okay, and you don't know, and obviously you can't testify to when this was collected versus the other shell cases, right?
Correct.
And you can't testify to the canine in the picture, can you?
I cannot.
We'll show you Government Exhibit 34, image 4485. I'm sorry, I scratched that. 4476. Let me zoom out. What's that an image of?
4476 appears to be an image of the clothing from the decedent.
That you reviewed?
Yes.
Is there a hole in this?
Yes, there's a possible bullet defect in the shirt.
Can you circle it? And looking at that hole, I mean, there's a lot of variability here, but is that, I'm sensing you're a perfectionist, Rick. Looking at that hole, is that hole be caused by a bullet in yaw?
It could be, yes.
I'll show you Exhibit 34, image 4476. Is that a close-up of that same photo?
Yes, 4476 is a close-up of the defect on the shirt.
Now we have a better picture of that hole, right?
Yes.
And again, do you know what's around the hole, what the staining is?
Appears to be blood.
What number was this?
4476.
I thought the one before that.
4475 was the one prior. And did you also review the exit wound of the victim?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Government Exhibit 34, image 4497. That appeared to be what you saw and reviewed for your report?
Yes.
And would that hole be consistent with a bullet in yaw?
Yes.
The exit will be consistent with a bullet that's a Wolf brand bullet.
It's not inconsistent with a Wolf brand bullet.
Would that hole be consistent or inconsistent with a Wolf brand bullet being fired from an AK-47?
It could be, yes.
And there was some, there was, in your report, there was some discussion about let's talk about the yaw of the bullet, right?
Yes.
And you testified that yaw can be caused by something in between the shooter and the victim.
Yes, we typically refer to that as an intermediate object.
And you had reviewed some evidence about a possible tree limb in this case, right?
Yes, there was a tree limb that was identified on the crime scene as a potential bullet impact site.
And I'm not asking you to testify about where that tree limb was found and what direction it was found. I'm not asking for that. I want to show you the tree limb. I marked the last page of my set. Here we are. I'm going to show you what's been marked as Government Exhibit 71. You don't have an image number on back, so I'm going to designate them 71A and B. I'm going to show you Government Exhibit 71A. That is the remaining part of the branch. Is that right?
Yes.
And it looks like it's been, we got someone sawing the base of it off, but the top part, can you circle the top part where I'm referring to where, that looks like it was broken off, right?
It does.
And you're not here testifying to what possibly caused the breakage of that, right?
I am not.
Right. The question I have for you is that branch, you see the size of this branch? Let me show you a different picture. That branch, can that branch cause a yaw? If a round hits that branch, can it cause a yaw?
Yes, that would be an intermediate object that could cause yaw if a bullet strikes it.
And that branch, would that branch necessarily stop the bullet, or the bullet would just continue on but in yaw?
Well, I haven't done my own empirical testing of the mesquite trees, but with other trees in Washington, I would expect a branch of that diameter to not stop, 7.62 by 39.
A branch of what
that
diameter?
Bullet is a pretty serious bullet.
That's traveling out of the muzzle about 2,400 feet per second, about twice as fast as a 9mm, for example.
I'm going to show you.
See how slowly she goes next to the witness.
Just about done here, Rick. I'll show you Government Exhibit 121. Scenario view from a drone image. Do you see? Oh, upside down. Do you see that? The markings are not from the drone. The markings are for us to identify some things, but do you recognize that photo?
I do.
And just so that we all understand each other, Exhibit 121, the blue is one spent shell casing off to the right.
Yes.
And the yellow is the remaining 8 shell casings in yellow, right?
Yes.
You see can you draw a circle around the cones, the orange cones? And you see the ejection pattern, right?
Yes.
Or the result of the ejection of the casings, right?
I do.
If a shooter is standing where the cones are, would the ejection pattern in yellow and blue be consistent with if a shooter is standing where the cones are?
That is certainly one possible location.
And also, do you know, is this the cone start for the measurement to the victim's body, the 350 feet?
That's how I understood it.
And 350 divided by 3, can you do math for me?
About 115 yards.
115 yards. Just 1 second, Your Honor. So the questions I have, Your Honor. Oh, we'll wait till the end to seal up the boxes. That's what question I have. Cross-examination.
Buckle up.
Morning.
Morning.
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, perfect. So I just want to get a little bit of background information. You did not visit the scene of the crime in this case, is that correct?
That is correct.
So you reviewed photographs from that scene, right?
Yes.
And you reviewed, I think you said it was a Leica scan of that scene, is that right?
Yes.
Did you notice any differences? Were you aware, let me back up a little, that Leica scan was taken in a significant period of time after the date of this offense?
It was.
When was the date of that scan, if you recall?
I'll have to check my report, but it was later. There were lots more leaves on the trees. I think is probably where you're going with that.
And you can check your report if you want to. Do you have it up there with you?
Yeah, let me look real quick.
So yaw has to do with, imagine if there's a bullet flying straight in one direction. Yaw has to do with it like going off axis as it's continuing. So it would be turning or tumbling one direction.
6/29 of 2023 is when it was scanned.
Okay. And you mentioned there were leaves on the branches in the scan versus at the time of the event, right?
Yes.
Were there other alterations to the scene that you were aware of or made aware of?
Not that I was particularly looking at. I was more concerned with what potential line of sight you could see with the point cloud versus the crime scene
And I'm
photograph.
referring, if you remember, specifically to a prickly pear cactus. Do you recall in the photographs there being a prickly pear cactus near the area where the shell casings are located versus later that cactus is no longer there?
That does ring a bell, but I can't confirm that for sure.
Okay, but the photographs of the scene would contain more accurately what was present on the scene versus the scan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you're approached by the state in this case, and you're provided with some background information about the case. Is that right?
Yes.
What background information were you provided with in a nutshell?
Well, I listed in my report several things. As I stated earlier, I typically don't look at witness statements until I objectively look at the evidence to see what my impression is of what was collected and what the crime scene photos tell me. But I submitted quite a few documents to look at. But I was primarily interested in the ballistic evidence was and what the crime scene photos told me.
And from the crime scene photos and ballistic evidence, you know that there is a group of shell casings, correct?
Yes.
And that group of shell casings is located in this patio area, correct?
It is.
And you know that there is a body that was discovered at this location, correct?
Yes.
And you know, I believe, is it from the Leica scan, you know the approximate location of the body, is that correct?
Well, the drone was the initial distance determination, and then I received the Leica scan data, and what they did for the Leica scan was cone off the area where the body was recovered. Of course, the body wasn't in the scan because it had been removed. So I had an approximate location of where the body was recovered, and I compared that to the drone measurement that was taken at the time, and it was consistent.
And that's approximate, correct?
Yes.
You don't know the exact specific location of the body, correct?
I don't.
And were you told or did you receive any information that provided you with the positioning of the body that was discovered?
I have photographs of the decedent in place. So that, in terms of face down, face up position, is that what you mean?
Okay, well, we can start there. So you have photographs of the body, right?
Yes.
And that tells you that this body is discovered face down, correct?
Yes.
Or at least that's what the photographs show you.
It's my understanding, correct.
Did the photographs show you how that body is positioned with respect to the house or the shell casings?
I don't think so.
So do you know specifically
Where's the
where
attorney
the
nodding and
entrance
shaking her
was,
head?
let's say? Do you know where that is positioned in relation to the house and the shell casings?
No,
You don't know where that entrance wound is?
not relative to the scene itself. There wasn't enough landmarks in those photographs for me to be able to determine where in space the body was. I mean, there was a tree nearby, so a couple of more photographs I might have been able to tell, but with what I was received, I could not.
Okay, so you don't know, for example, if the body's face down and the head is pointed towards the house, or the feet, or vice versa?
Correct, I do not know the orientation of the decedent
Okay.
at recovery.
And along those lines too, obviously you didn't know the orientation of this person prior to this person being hit by a bullet, correct?
Correct.
So you don't know if this person was standing when he got shot, is that right?
I have no data to support a conclusion on that.
And you don't know if he was running or walking or anything like that, right?
That's correct.
And you don't know if after he got shot, he moved or took a step or staggered. You don't know anything like that, is that right?
I do not. I didn't see any evidence of bloodletting that might indicate movement after, but I mean, with a small caliber bullet, such as .30 caliber, you might not see that initially. So again, there's no data to draw information or conclusions from.
Okay. And so I think you mentioned, using like a trajectory rod if there's a car with bullet holes in it, right?
Correct.
And sometimes that can give you a good idea of where this bullet came from when it hit this car. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, that's fair to say that's only going to work if you know, for example, that the car was not moving, right?
Well, bullets travel fast enough that, typically speaking, if the car is moving, the bullet path into the car won't change, but you don't know exactly where the car is in space. I guess that's your question.
Right.
Okay.
So it gives you approximations, right?
Yes.
Based on other factors that you might know and you might not know, correct?
Yes.
And so if a person is going to be shot, for example, and you don't know where he was standing or how he was moving or what position or direction he was in before he got shot, then doing something like a rod from the wound would not be very helpful. Is that right?
Yes, well, rods and bodies aren't typically, I guess, the practice now because bodies can move so much in space and so quickly. And an upward trajectory might be flat because a person's slightly bent over or some other reasoning for that. Also, we talked about yaw with intervening objects earlier.
That's a good win for the
The bullet
defense.
can yaw on the body as well. And so the tissue impact could veer that bullet from its original path as it travels through the body. And I've definitely seen that experimentally and in casework. So that's another, probably, in my opinion, another reason why medical examiners don't typically put rods into bodies.
And I want to come back to that in a minute. But first I want to talk a little bit about the shell casings. That is a piece of evidence that you did examine, correct?
The casings from the scene I actually didn't examine, just photographs only, but they were consistent with everything that I just previously testified to.
Right. So you get photographs of this group of shell casings at the scene, is that correct?
Yes.
And then you're provided this weapon, right?
Yes.
And you're supposed to test this weapon to get an idea of where these shell casings land when they eject from this weapon, correct?
Well, I didn't do an ejection pattern on this rifle. It was another examiner. I was just simply observing my testing on where the cartridge cases were landing to see if it was consistent with what was previously reported. If that makes sense.
That other examiner was Aaron Brunel, is that correct?
Yes.
So he tests the weapon and he makes a determination about the pattern of the shell casings, correct?
Yes, in this case.
And you reviewed his report prior to coming to your own conclusions, is that correct?
I did.
And you also mentioned that you fired yourself this weapon from a stand, is that correct?
I did.
But you didn't draw any conclusions based on that shell casing distribution, correct?
Correct.
Is that because that was on a different kind of surface?
Well, it was two surfaces at that particular range. Right about where the ejection port was, there was concrete and there was gravel. And I wasn't set up in my one visit to do that type of examination. You have to rope it off, and I usually scan. I usually 3D scan my ejection patterns. I didn't have that ability. I was simply just observing the general characteristics of where the cartridge cases were landing when I did my test firing.
So Aaron Brunel is the one who did the more detailed and thorough shell casing testing.
Yes. You grade it off and you have a certain height and you measure all those things. Yes.
And you agree that different surfaces can impact the way that the shell casings are distributed, correct?
Absolutely.
So for example, if we're firing a weapon and shell casings come out and it's cement, they're going to bounce around when they land on the cement, correct?
Yes.
And if I'm on wet grass or a muddy area or something, they're not going to bounce around as much. Is that correct?
That's true.
So depending on the conditions on the ground, literally, that sort of depends how these shell casings get distributed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And there can be other objects. We talked about intervening objects with bullets, but there can be other objects that interfere with shell casings as well, correct?
Yes.
So that prickly pear cactus that we mentioned is an object that could, for example, interfere with how those shell casings get distributed, correct?
Yes.
And all of that can interfere with a determination of how distant the shooter is from those shell casings. Is that correct?
It can.
So the best way to test, for example, is you see a crime scene and there are shell casings there. And from the shell casings, you're trying to determine how far away from that group of shell casings the person firing this weapon was standing approximately. That's what you're trying to determine, correct?
Approximate shooter location, yes.
And so if you're going to make that determination, the best practice is to test the weapon on a surface that's very similar to the surface at the crime scene, correct?
Yes.
Because otherwise it can be off significantly, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
You try to control your variables.
Right. And other variables involved in shell casing testing, does that include the height off the ground that the weapon is fired?
Yes.
So can you explain that a little bit? How does the height of the weapon affect a shell casing pattern distribution?
Well, think of a firearm as a system of tools that work together to fire this cartridge. And there's two pretty significant tools in the firearm that help or assist with that ejection pattern. One is called the extractor, which extracts. We're very simple in firearms. And there's an ejector that ejects. And the extractor is a hook, and the ejector is a post. And as it comes to the rear, they interact with each other, and that's what causes the cartridge case to fly out of the firearm. And there's inherent variability in that. And if you were to control all the variables you could and just fire this firearm in one place, one position, you're still going to get a little bit of distribution error, if you will. And so anything that's going to affect that interaction with the extraction and ejection could affect where they land, meaning how you're holding the firearm, what ammunition you're using, and of course what height you are off the ground.
So, and there are all different positions that people fire from, too, right?
Yes.
So you could be standing and holding a rifle up at your shoulder, correct?
Yes.
Or you could be kneeling and holding that same rifle, correct?
Yes.
You could be in a prone position on your stomach and holding that same rifle, correct?
You can.
And you can be aiming up or down or anywhere in between, correct?
Yes.
Do all of those things potentially affect the shell casing distribution?
Definitely can.
And if you're holding, let's just throw another variable in there. What if you're talking about somebody who's a left-handed shooter? Can that affect the way the weapon is held?
It can. I actually haven't done any pattern testing with left-handed shooters with those kind of rifles, but I mean, anything that could be a variable on how that firearm is held could affect the potential of where they land.
Were you told in this case that the suspect was left-handed?
I believe that was mentioned at some point.
Did you adjust any of your testing to account for that variable?
I didn't do the ejection pattern testing, and my testing was done in a rest, so it wasn't right hand, left hand. It was a static rest that I placed the rifle in.
Okay, so that's a question for Aaron Brunel, who did that testing.
Yeah, save that for him.
I will do that, thank you. So when you're talking about what you can learn from a group of shell casings, for example, if you just stumble upon a group of shell casings out in the middle of nowhere, you could possibly learn what type of ammunition was fired. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you can tell that from the shell casings themselves, correct?
You can, and sometimes firearm type.
Sometimes firearm type, correct? Yes. Not always, right?
Not always.
Because many types of ammunition are compatible with multiple types of firearms, correct?
Yes.
So from the shell casings that you observed in this case, what could you determine just from looking at those shell casings? What are things that you could determine definitively, conclusively?
That they were the AK caliber, meaning the 7.62 by 39. They were wolf head stamped, and they were also steel cartridge cases, which is typical for that type of weapon platform.
You say AK caliber. Are those shell casings, is that ammunition that's compatible with other types of weapons besides an AK?
Yes, there's many manufacturers that make firearms that will chamber and fire the 7.62 by 39 millimeter.
So just from looking at that group of shell casings, you don't know which weapon or which type of weapon was fired. That's correct, right?
For my examination, of course, they were sent to me. I could do a microscopic comparison and identify them to a specific firearm, but I did not do that in this case.
You can do that with shell casings?
Yes.
How accurate is that?
Well, based on my training experience, when I identify something, I'm confident that they were fired from that firearm.
Okay. And that's only if you do a specific type of testing on the shell casing, correct?
Yes, not to go into too much detail, but I have a comparison microscope that allows me to look at two things at the same time. So I could test fires from the rifle, I get evidence items, and I look at them simultaneously for the marks left by those system of tools that I just talked about. So the extractor will leave a mark, ejector will leave a mark, the firing pin leaves marks, and those are all individual microscopically. So that's what I'm looking at when I do comparisons.
And you didn't do that in this case, right?
Correct. Another question for Brood now.
Okay. So with what we have right now, we're not sure which weapon these shell casings came from, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And a group of shell casings, assuming you have the correct weapon for those shell casings, and assuming that you've test fired that weapon, that will tell you approximately the distance that the shooter was standing when that weapon was fired, correct?
Yeah, how I report it out is I have an area of probability, and I'll draw a circle that based on where this distribution is, the shooter is probably standing in this approximate area. Given all those factors and control areas that we were talking about.
And just to do kind of a visual, so let's say there's a, can you still hear me?
I can.
You don't project that well. So let's say there's a pile of shell casings right here, and you've tested the weapon and you've determined the distance of the shooter is about this far. So imagine shell casings right there. And it tells you a distance that's approximate, right?
Yes.
So it could be a little bit over here, it could be a little bit over here, and vice versa, right?
Yes, but probably not in the corner of the room or in the hallway.
Right, so it gives you a margin of error.
Yes.
Right? And you mentioned a circle, correct?
That's how I do it. A lot of people, well, some people will do just grids and mark individual and not do an average. It just depends on the type of case and what you're trying to demonstrate.
Does this work? Is this working?
Yes.
Okay, so if there's a shell casing pile right there, the shooter, let's say this is the distance approximate that you've determined, could be standing right here, right?
Yes.
And aiming in this direction, potentially.
Yes.
But there's a whole circle around here that would also be consistent with where the shooter's standing, right?
Do you mean position of the muzzle or the bore?
The person. So shell casings are right there. Let's say this is the distance you've determined. I know it's not realistic. But person, I'm the shooter, those are the shell casings. I'm firing the weapon, right? Shell casings are going this way. This is one position I could be standing in if the distance is correct,
yes.
Right? But there's a whole circle that's drawn around this pile of shell casings.
So if you walk around the circle with the ejection port facing your circle, I think I see where you're trying to
So I could be standing here too, in other words.
Yes.
Right? And that's still consistent with the pile of shell casings. And I could be standing anywhere around that circle that's not obstructed, right?
Yes.
Okay. So from a pile of shell casings, you're getting a distance and you're getting a radius, basically.
Yes.
At any point along that radius, the person could be standing, correct?
If I understand your question correctly, yes.
Okay. In other words, the shell casings themselves don't determine which direction a person was aiming, right?
That's correct.
You need other evidence to look at that and to determine that, correct?
Yes.
You might need actually a fixed point or a known point where the shooter was standing. Is that correct?
Or a bullet impact downrange.
A bullet impact on something that had a fixed point or a known point,
Yes.
right? Okay, so a bullet impact itself doesn't have a fixed point or a known point, right? Unless it's in something that doesn't move, correct?
Correct. Stationary object.
Right, okay. You mentioned something when you test fired the weapon. Oh, before I move on from that, describe a little bit how possibly aiming in an upward direction versus a downward direction might change the shell casing distribution that you see.
Well, it's all geometry. The cartridge case is being extracted, ejected, roughly the same angle. So if you're changing the angle of the bore of that firearm, steering it so, and the distribution on this particular firearm is slightly forward of the shooter and to the right, somewhere around 15 feet or so, just on average. But so if you were, and that's from a horizontal bore, that's how the convention is to do this type of testing. Now, if you were to raise or lower that bore to not horizontal, to the ground, you're going to change that geometry of that extraction and ejection and could potentially affect the pattern. How much it affects the pattern, it would depend on the testing that you would do. You have to do empirical testing to determine what variable, how much is that pattern distribution changing when you move the bore up and down.
And so it's possible to do empirical testing to see what changes about a specific weapon or specific shell casing distribution when you fire at various angles, right?
Sure, but again, there's a safety concern for that too. As I mentioned earlier, if you hold it about 33 degrees, that bullet will go about 2 miles almost. So you have to be sure you're in proper conditions to test that. But yes, it can be done.
Okay. And so if there are two people who dispute, let's say, the direction of fire, one of them says, this person was firing straight through this mesquite thicket that you mentioned, and another person said the shots were being fired at an upward angle over the top of one of the trees out there. There are empirical tests that can be done to see which scenario is more consistent with the physical evidence, correct?
You would have to do that empirical testing to see if the cartridge case distribution would be affected by that type of angle of the rifle.
So you could test that.
Yes.
And then you could come to some conclusions about which scenario is more likely based on the physical evidence, correct?
If there was significant variability in the pattern distribution.
And that wasn't done in this case, is that correct?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Nobody asked you to do a test, to try to test the theory that this was being fired in an upward direction, correct?
Correct.
Okay. In fact, you were just asked basically to test the theory that these shots were being fired from the general location of the patio to the location of the body. Is that correct?
Well, actually, didn't test that. Brunel did, but his report was consistent with someone firing from the patio based on the data that I had.
What I mean is okay. Let me go back. You were asked whether or not the shots being fired from the patio were consistent with the evidence that you observed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in your opinion, shots being fired from the patio are consistent with what you observed, correct?
Correct.
And if I asked you, is the evidence that you observed consistent with somebody standing on the patio and firing in a more upward direction? Is that consistent?
In terms of the wound in the decedent?
In terms of the shell casings?
I wouldn't be able to determine that. I mean, again, I would have to do empirical testing, but I don't know if the distribution of the cartridge case would be significantly changed or altered by shooting it in the air. I mean, they're still coming out to the right of the shooter, but there is a geometry difference.
And my question is it possible that that's a consistent scenario? Somebody's standing on the patio in that approximate radius of the shell casings, and they're aiming in a more upward direction. That's consistent.
That's consistent, true, yes.
Thank you.
That was a win of the point. It was a long fight to get there, but she won the point there.
Let me ask you a little bit about some of the testing that you did or that you reviewed when you were coming to your conclusions. You mentioned something about the impact of these bullets downrange, and you said that they basically made clean holes or something like that, right?
During my testing, all the impacts were circular.
Okay. That means when there aren't any objects in the way, the bullet is not tumbling, it's not in yaw. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are there weapons where when you fire them, even though there are no intervening obstacles, a bullet might still be in yaw or it might be tumbling?
Yes, I mentioned that during direct. If the barrel is damaged or the rifling is missing or the barrel is corroded or intentionally altered, you can see bullets that leave the muzzle in yaw, meaning they're not stable as they leave the muzzle. And that was one of the tests that I performed. I wanted to ensure that that rifle was shooting straight.
And so sometimes just the design of the rifle or the condition of the rifle itself can cause a bullet to be in yaw, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So just because you see a wound that indicates a bullet is in yaw, that doesn't necessarily mean any intervening object had anything to do with that, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
She's good. She's very
You
meticulous, but
mentioned
she's
something
good.
about point of aim versus point of impact. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, as I mentioned, the sights on that rifle can be changed, adjusted, and depending on the distance you're at. So say if you have it set for 50 yards and you shoot a target at 300 yards, your point of aim is going to be different than where the bullet actually strikes. And it's also a common term when you're hunting rifles with scopes on them and you're sighting them in. That's what you're doing. You're altering the optics so your point of aim matches your point of impact, so you know what you're hitting when you shoot. So that's what I was testing there, is with the 300-yard sighting, where is it striking at 100 yards?
And where is it striking at 100 yards?
Well, these sights compensate for bullet drop, right? You shoot the bullet through the air, it's going to be affected by gravity and drop. So that's what that sight is for, is to compensate for that drop of bullet. So if your sight is set for 300 yards and you shoot at 100 yards, your bullet's going to be high because it's traveling up and then coming back down to reach your point of aim, point of impact. And that's what I saw when I did my testing, is shooting at a circle at 100 yards, the bullets were impacting high. And that's, again, what I expected to see.
And so at that distance, what was the difference between point of aim and point of impact?
Well, it's going to be a little variable. It's my testing setup. It's not precision, but about a foot high, on average, is what I was seeing.
And so just so we know, that means if you're aiming with that weapon at an object at 100 yards away approximately, and you aim at something that's 2 feet off of the ground, the bullet's going to land 3 feet off of the ground. Is that approximately correct?
Assuming that you're aiming it properly, yeah. It's a precise. And these rifles aren't precise. They're battle rifles. They're not sniper rifles. So there's variability shot to shot on where the bullet impacts, even in a rest.
But there's just going to be a difference between where you're aiming at versus where the shot lands.
Yes.
Okay. And at 115 yards, the difference for this rifle was about a foot, right?
About a foot. I didn't map it out, but again, this is just my main concern there was the bullet stable.
And were you aware of the height of the entrance wound on the victim that was found in this case?
I'd have to check the autopsy report, but the right flank would be several feet off the ground.
And just approximately, if I said it was about 4 feet off the ground, would that sound more or less correct?
Yes.
Okay. We're not doing a scientific test or anything
Okay.
right now, just approximately. So And we have to start with some assumptions, right? Because we don't know where this person was or how this person was standing when they got shot. But let's assume that they're just standing upright, okay? And the shot comes in and it hits the person about 4 feet off the ground. That means that the point of aim was somewhere around 3 feet off the ground, correct?
Could be, yes.
At that distance, assuming that that distance is correct and the person is just standing,
And
right?
aiming it perfectly, etc.
Okay. And so somebody from 115 yards away, if they're aiming at a spot that's about 3 feet off the ground, they're aiming down. Is that fair to say?
Yes, if they're standing upright.
And that's another variable too. You don't know how tall the person who's shooting is, correct?
Right, if they're sitting or if they're prone or on a knee.
So somebody who's very tall, standing up at that distance, is going to be aiming in a general downward direction, correct?
Well, depends on how high the shoulder is off the ground, but yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, if the person's 6'2" or so, and they're holding it at their shoulder, that's generally a downward aim. Is that correct?
Right, you can anticipate the shoulder being 5 feet off the ground, and if the bullet's impacting 4 feet off the ground, then you would have to aim downward.
Okay. Did you account for any of that when you look through the Leica scan and the state's generally asking, is this possible? Is it possible that this shot came from this location and hit this person at this distance? Did you account for any of those variables?
Well, I certainly account for them, and that's why my conclusions are consistent with and not inconsistent with the shot coming from that area, because I don't know the body's position, I don't know the shooter's position, because I don't have any fixed points for which to measure.
Okay. And so, did you test different scenarios involving shooters of different heights, for example?
No.
And were you provided any information about how tall the shooter was in this case?
I might have, but I didn't consider it for what I was doing.
Okay. But you agree you need that information to determine the possibility of this shot coming from this location and hitting this person, correct?
I don't necessarily need the dimensions of the shooter, just because there's so many different shooting positions, and also I didn't have a known position of the decedent either. So even if I would have considered that, I mean, all factors given, it's still consistent that the shot could have come from that area.
Well, I guess how do you know that that's even possible if you don't have these variables to consider?
Well, I know that the bullet can travel 115 yards and penetrate a body, and if we don't know the position of either the victim or the shooter, I go back to what I know about that particular weapon platform and what it's capable of doing.
But there are other variables that you have to consider, correct? For example, if there was like a 10-foot tall, really thick brick wall in between where the shooter was and where the victim was, you would say that's not consistent with what you're viewing on the ground. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe that was a poorly worded question, but you have to account for the fact that if there are intervening objects, it could be possible that those objects actually prevent a bullet from traveling that distance and getting to that person, correct?
Yes.
And the position of the person has a lot to do with that also, correct?
Position of both parties has a lot to do with how that bullet gets to where it's going.
And you don't know the position of either of the two parties, correct?
That's correct.
And you also weren't provided any information about any other potential shooters in the area, correct?
No, there was no other ballistic evidence that suggested another firearm. I think I might have had some corroded pistol cartridges, but they were too old to have been involved.
And when you say ballistic evidence, you're only talking about firearms, ammunition, shell casings, physical things, is that
And
right?
bullet defects on objects. That would be the
Okay.
last component of that.
You're not talking about witness statements, correct?
Correct.
So if there's a witness statement who says, I heard a shot and it came from somewhere over there, that's not evidence that you're considering in making that determination, correct?
Primarily, my analysis is based on objective data that I collect.
Did you do a specific, let me pull this picture up real quick for you. This is Defense Exhibit KK. And it's already been.
Tried it. It's good. Not my favorite. So this is defense exhibit, meaning the defense positioned the camera to take the picture.
Oh boy. Okay. And can you see that picture in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what this is? Do you recognize this?
I believe this is the potential line of sight between the house and where the victim was recovered.
Correct. And so this photograph is taken essentially from, let's say, the view of the potential shooter, okay? And you can see it goes out there and you see all of those obstacles that are in the way, correct?
Yes.
And do you know what all of those obstacles are? Obviously there are trees. Do you know what some of these other things are?
If I remember right, there was a storage box and some other random objects laying there.
And when you say storage box, are you talking about that big square thing that we see in the middle?
The big square thing.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're looking at the right object. Do you know how high that object is?
I would have to go back and look at the scan data to measure it, but I don't off the top of my head, no.
Did the scan data measure this and measure the height of this object?
Scan data measures everything.
Okay, and so it'll measure the thickness of those pillars, I suppose, right?
Yeah, so what it does, it makes a point cloud, and every point is a measurable data point. So anything that it sees, I can measure up to probably like 5 millimeter accuracy. So once that scan is done, you can go back to anything in the scene and measure it.
Okay, and I guess my question is, given these obstacles and given the known measurements that you have for these obstacles, given the fact that this weapon has to be aiming in a downward direction, assuming, and we're making assumptions, I understand that, assuming the shooter is a 6 foot and change tall person who's holding this rifle at his shoulder. Given the point of impact and the point of aim, he has to be aiming generally in a downward direction, correct?
Based on the sights that were set on the rifle when I examined it. Yes.
Correct. And there's that big object right there in the way, right?
I'm not sure it's entirely in the way. I'd have to look at them. I mean, based on the perspective of this photo, it does definitely look like it's in the way, but when you look at the point cloud, it seems to be a little more line of sight available. It's hard to say, but it leaves there. But yes, it's definitely something to consider as objects in the way of the bullet path.
And so if I'm aiming in a downward direction and I hit that object's going to stop a bullet, right?
And it would leave evidence behind.
Right, and there wasn't any such evidence that you observed, correct?
Not that I saw in the documents.
And same thing with those walls, the pillars of the pergola right there, right? Those pillars, those will stop a bullet, right?
Should, yes.
And if they don't, they'll leave evidence, right?
Definitely they'll leave evidence.
And obviously that big mesquite tree, the thick branches, the thick trunk, that'll either stop a bullet or leave evidence, right?
Yes.
And there wasn't any such evidence that you observed, right?
Not that was in the documents that I looked at.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about this, the tree branch, because you were discussing the tree branch that was broken, correct?
Yes.
And in the point cloud, does it show the general relationship between that location of that tree branch and the location of the deceased person?
It does.
Okay. And is it fair to say that that tree branch is a little bit to the, is it south?
South.
A little bit to the south of the deceased person, and it's in between the person and the shell casings back at the house, correct?
It is.
And so, just describe to me, so if you think that the tree branch can cause yaw on the bullet, that was your testimony, correct?
Yes.
And a bullet like the one that you're describing is a bullet that can go through that tree branch, correct?
It can.
How much deflection is possible with this type of bullet if it impacts this tree branch?
I didn't do any empirical testing on how much deflection, but based on other testing I've done, think of a tree branch as being round, right? So if it hits it straight on or perpendicular to it, it's going to affect it less. If it hits it at a glance, and I've seen that on windows. I've actually bounced bullets off of windows and not broken them because they've hit so lightly, but still enough of an impact to destabilize the bullet. So it would depend, is the short answer, on where it hits on the branch, how much deflection and yaw you would get.
This branch was impacted at about 2 feet off the ground. Is that about right?
Well, assuming it was impacted, yes.
Okay, yeah, assuming that, and we don't know that. But assuming that it was a bullet that strikes this branch, that's happening at about 2 feet off the ground, more or less, right?
More or less.
And it's a little bit closer to the house, so that might affect the point of aim difference. But 2 feet off the ground, you're going to have to be aiming at a spot lower than 2 feet off the ground with this rifle at that distance, correct?
It would depend on the distance to the branch. I mean, the impact testing I was doing was at 100 yards, so this is closer than that. So when there's an arc trajectory on the bullet, so I would have to do some tests at that distance to see where you would have to aim because it's coming out and going up and doing bullet things. But yes, there would be some kind of
doing bullet things.
Point of aim, point of impact difference.
It's going pew pew pew.
And you don't know what that is.
Correct.
And so you don't know if that means that impacting at that tree from the distance is an aim that's higher than that tree or lower than that tree.
Right.
Okay, so we have no idea how the weapon is aimed if there's a bullet that hits that tree.
Yeah, if it's a confirmed bullet defect.
Okay. And it's not a confirmed bullet defect, just to be clear, right?
It is not.
Okay. And do you know what sort of angle this bullet, let's say a bullet does hit that tree branch and it's going to go up north where the deceased person is, right? It impacts at about 2 feet off the ground, this tree branch, but then it has to enter at about 4 feet off the ground. So do you know anything about the possibilities or probabilities of that happening?
I know it's possible because I've deflected bullets upward. And once a bullet's unstable, it can go any direction it wants. And going back to my glass example, I was shooting relatively flat, and that bullet deflected 30 degrees off the glass. And again, it's not apples to apples really compared to mesquite branches, but the short answer is I would have to do some empirical testing to see what directions the defect or the deflection would happen.
And I'm assuming that's probably impacted also by whether this bullet is already in yaw before it hits that branch, right?
Yes.
So if it's already in yaw, it can hit something else and then it could be thrown even more off course. Is that right?
It could.
And the short answer is you don't know if this is really possible given the variables that we have on this scene because you haven't done empirical testing with these variables. Is that correct?
Correct.
Meaning mesquite wood is going to be different from another kind of wood and another kind of tree, right?
There's definitely varying differences in hardness of wood, and that dramatically affects bullet impacts and what happens after the impact.
And that's true even in the same species of tree, correct?
I would think so.
A tree that's maybe rotten or dying is going to be softer, let's say, than a tree that's, well, maybe it's not, I don't know, but that might make a difference, correct?
It could.
Okay. And there was some testing done of this tree branch to try to determine if it could be shown that a bullet actually impacted this tree branch. Is that right?
Yes.
And you didn't do that testing yourself, is that correct?
I did not.
But you reviewed the results of that, correct?
I did.
And specifically, the testing is looking for something that either contains lead residue or looks like a bullet hole. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in this case, there was nothing that appeared to be a bullet hole on this tree branch. Is that correct?
Yes.
And there was no lead residue collected from this tree branch either. Is that correct?
There was no lead detected on the tree branch.
So there's no indication that a bullet actually impacted this tree, correct?
Correct.
And were you also made aware that there was animal fur that was in or around this same area by this tree branch?
I think I'd heard that, but I don't think it's in the report that I reviewed.
Okay. If one of the detectives who first noticed the break in this branch says there's animal hair there, that's obviously another explanation as to how this branch got broken, correct?
It's possible, yes.
And there's no testing that was done on this branch to determine when the branch was broken either, right?
Not that I know of.
And I'm imagining that's a whole different area of expertise to determine the age of broken wood and things like that, right?
That is out of my realm.
Okay.
Or the horse.
Mine too, if you can believe it. So there's no evidence to suggest that a bullet actually hit this tree and broke this branch. That's correct, right?
From the material I reviewed, you're correct.
Okay.
Yes. This is a
Did
finishing.
you test, when you test fired this rifle, did you, or when you reviewed Aaron Brunel's report on that, were you able to come to any conclusions about the grouping of the shots?
With the cartridge cases?
With the shots that you fired downrange?
The impacts, no.
So you don't know if they generally land close together or if they're very spread out?
Well, with my testing, they were generally close together. I mean, they all hit a 3 foot by 4 foot panel at 100 yards. So, I mean, I know I was at least hitting that much area. Again, I wasn't going for accuracy, it was more stability and general impact of the sights versus the point of aim.
Okay. So all of the shots land, and you're firing in a stand, right?
Yes.
So the rifle is in a static position, it doesn't move, correct?
Yes.
So every shot is fired from the same exact position of the rifle, correct?
In theory, yes.
In theory, when you're testing. I know it's not perfect, but it's as close as you can get to holding the rifle in the same position and firing shots downrange.
It is.
And that gave you a result of a 3 or 4 foot, would you say, sort of area of impact for the shots?
Probably less than that. Probably about a 2 foot. I mean, again, I didn't measure it. I was just trying to hit the paper, and you know, again, that particular rest isn't as precision or as precise as I could probably get on how to hold that rifle. But again, I was looking for different things.
Could you just sort of show with your hands how big approximately that area is? Okay, so all of the shots you fired landed in an area that's that size?
Yeah, roughly.
How many shots did you fire? Do you remember?
To check my notes.
He's logging into his iPad. Oh, you've got mail. I'd like to
15 shots.
Okay.
Review
so
the
all of those
notes
15 shots
and your
landed
iPad.
in that area.
Yes.
In this case, you examined a body, right?
No.
Or you examined photographs of a body. Okay.
Yes.
That was not meant to be a trick. Sorry. And you saw one entry wound in that body. Is that correct?
That was my opinion. There was one entry, one exit.
There weren't any other bullet holes in that body, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't review witness statements, I know that, but there is a witness who states he was there just one step behind this person when this person gets shot. Assuming that the person who's firing the rifle, in this case, is firing at this person from 115 yards away, and assuming that person is holding the rifle steady and firing a bunch of shots in this direction, you would probably expect to see more bullet holes. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. I work a lot of officer-involved shootings of officers who are trained, very well trained to shoot, and they will empty 2 magazines, and I can find 2 bullet defects in the area they were shooting. So it doesn't surprise me that there were a lot of shots and not a lot of bullet holes or defects.
That's with the pistol.
Given the grouping of this rifle, and given, let's say that the person is holding this rifle fairly straight and firing shots very rapidly, and given the grouping that you tested, under those circumstances, you would expect to see additional bullet impacts, correct?
Now, going back to my previous example, I mean, officers, when they qualify, have to shoot their magazine in about an 8-inch circle to qualify. And I've seen, again, lots of shots fired where the decedents hit one time.
Officers use pistols.
I mean, again, there's other factors to consider, but just the sheer accuracy of the firearm doesn't necessarily play into what I might see downrange.
How about things that are around this person when the person gets shot? If there are, let's say, 9 shots that are fired rapidly in this general direction, you're going to expect to see other things that are hit. Is that right?
Yes, there would probably be some defects in some of the trees out there, but what they would look like, I don't know. I know that some of the trees in Washington that I've shot and tested, very subtle.
Tree killer.
Impacts to them, and I only know to look for them because I put them there. So I could understand why an investigation might miss some defects that were out in that large area.
And if there are other animals in the area, for example, you might be concerned that the animal might get hit, right?
Well, at any time a firearm is fired, you expect that, there's a level of danger to targets downrange.
And same thing with other people. If other people are standing near the target, right?
Yes.
Okay. You said, according to taking a look at the entrance wound, that it's your opinion that that wound was caused by a bullet in yaw. Is that different from a tumbling bullet?
No.
It's the same thing?
In terms of how it's going to affect a wound, it's the same thing.
Are there degrees of yaw or tumbling?
Definitely.
Can you tell anything, and just to kind of narrow that down a little, if a bullet is somersaulting over and over like this, that's pretty extreme, right?
Yes, and that's the word that you hear with the ricochet in the movies. That's what's causing that, is that bullet tumbling in over end.
But it could just be that the bullet's getting a little bit
I
off
just did the sound
course
effect
as
3
it
times with the
goes
mic off.
further, correct?
Certainly can, yes. And we have high-speed video evidence of both of those conditions.
And there's no way to tell from examining this wound what degree of interference this bullet had before impact. Is that right?
No, and that's something we could do with empirical testing. If a tumbling bullet would still penetrate, travel through the body and still exit versus one that was simply just slightly unstable, how much energy is it going to expel into the body and still have enough energy to exit the back skin, or the chest skin in this case, and go down range? So again, that's something that can be deciphered, but in this case, there's no way to tell from the entrance and exit wound if it was a tumbling bullet or one in yaw, but again, for all intents and purposes, it's the same.
Okay, but the degree of energy that the bullet loses has an impact when it hits a target, for example, right?
Yes, and going back to that 800-yard case, that was one of the factors that I considered, was the bullet ricocheting off the water, because there's a river there, and would it still have enough energy to go 800 yards and penetrate someone and kill them? And it didn't. So there is a level of instability that will affect the energy as it travels downrange.
Okay, and we don't know what object or what was acting on the bullet that impacted this person. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that bullet was never found, obviously, right? As far as we know. Okay. And without finding that bullet, we can't tell which weapon was responsible for causing this wound. Is that correct?
Right. If the bullet was recovered, microscopic comparisons to a particular firearm would be possible.
And that's not possible in this case, right?
Well, it's probably still out there somewhere, but not right now.
Okay. And having that bullet, we would be able to determine whether that matched the weapon that you tested, correct?
Yes.
And whether it didn't match the weapon that you tested also.
Yes.
So that weapon could be excluded or ruled out depending on the results of the testing of that bullet, correct?
It could be.
And you say the bullet's probably still out there. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it wasn't recovered. And so we have a through and through wound on a decedent. So in theory, that bullet is, somewhere out there.
That bullet couldn't have been destroyed on impact later with the ground or anything like that? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, AK-47 bullets, the 7.62 by 39, are steel jacketed with the copper coating. So you see a copper color on the bullets, but they're not copper bullets like you would see in a pistol. That is copper coated steel jacket with a lead core. So pretty durable, pretty hardy, but also can be subjected to rust since they're steel. But you don't see any fragments really on the x-ray, so that bullet's really not coming apart. And so some of the things we look for on these type of injuries is there pieces of lead in the wound tract to tell you the bullet's coming apart or fragmenting. Didn't see any of that on the x-ray, so I would anticipate the bullet is fairly intact wherever it is.
That's assuming that this wound was caused by an AK-47 full metal jacketed bullet, correct?
That's correct.
But it's also true this wound could have been caused by a number of different types of bullets, correct?
Yes.
What are some of the types of bullets that could have also caused this wound?
Well, it would have to be a high energy, non-fragmenting bullet. And there's some other ones out there, but typically speaking, this is consistent with AK-47 round versus the type of energy, the lack of fragmentation that we see in this case.
So like a 30-06?
What types of weapons are consistent with the type of weapon that can fire the rounds that you just described?
Any high-powered
The
rifle?
AK-47, the SKS rifle, which also shoots 7.62 by 39. There's, like I said earlier, a lot of other manufacturers chamber that cartridge in their firearms.
And I'm sorry, maybe I missed it. Did you say what other types of bullets could cause this wound?
Well, it would have to be probably full metal jacket ball ammo. If you had a hollow point or a soft point, you would see fragmentation in the wound tract. And so it'd need to be a full metal jacketed high energy bullet.
How many types of full metal jacketed ball ammunition exist?
Well, just about any type of military round would have a full metal jacket. It's a Geneva Convention requirement. So 308 Winchester, Russian round, the Russian sniper round, it'll come to me in a second, 7.54. And so there's some other different rifle cartridges out there that do have full metal jackets.
You described the AK that you examined as a common type of rifle, right?
Yes, to my knowledge, it's the most common rifle in the world.
Okay, I just want to say what you meant by that, but you just answered that question. So that's the most common type of rifle in the world, the AK-47.
Common platform, yes. Most of the ones in the world are machine guns or full auto, and this is the civilian semi-automatic version of that.
Would that then make that ammunition the most common type in the world as well?
It could, yes.
And so just to cut to the chase, there's no way to tell whether this wound that you examined was caused by the rifle that you tested, correct?
That's correct.
That's not something that we can prove scientifically, correct?
At this time, correct.
Okay. And you mentioned that this must have been a longer distance shot with a rifle. Explain what you mean by longer distance shot.
Well, a close range shot would deposit gunshot residue from the gases onto the clothing and the wound, and those were tested and determined to be negative.
You said the clothing was tested, correct?
Yes.
Do you remember if any testing was done of a backpack?
I didn't see any of that in the documentation.
Okay. If a backpack were being worn by this person, that's close to the body, right? That's almost a form of clothing, correct?
Yes.
And that could be tested also to see if this shot possibly came from closer range, correct?
It could be, but typically that testing is done around the wound area. So, but yes, any object or clothing item that person's wearing that's outer on the outside, we would probably look at.
And if the wound is sort of here on the lower flank or back area, that's going to be near the backpack, correct?
Like on this side?
Right, so a backpack is going to be near that wound.
Could be, yes.
And so in order to do a full empirical test to see whether this was close range or further away, it would probably be a good idea to test that backpack too, right?
Assuming they were wearing the backpack at the time, yes.
Assuming that, right. And to your knowledge, that wasn't done in this case, right?
I saw no reports relative to a backpack test.
When you say that there's was it gunshot residue that you're able to see to determine if this was a closer range shot? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. If you see gunshot residue on a person, or if you don't, how far away is the closest that a shot can be fired without leaving gunshot residue?
It would depend on the firearm and ammunition type, and that's one of the common procedures that we do is distance determination, meaning how far is the rifle away from the target where all that residue is dispersed and not deposited on the clothing. So you would have to do, again, empirical testing to determine that. But typically speaking, it's several feet before you do not detect any of that residue.
So when you say a long-range shot from a rifle, what you generally mean is that shot came from several feet away or further.
And impacted some kind of intervening object along that path.
Could the clothing cause that yaw that you described, just hitting the clothing?
Well, the clothing had the same type of defect.
What about the backpack?
Again, anything in that trajectory path could affect the bullet and its flight path.
And or it could have been fired from a weapon that shoots a bullet that has yaw, right?
Yes.
So there could be nothing in between the shooter and this person, right? But there could still be yaw, correct?
Yes.
Because the weapon being fired could be the kind of weapon that produces yaw, correct?
Yes.
And given that there's no gunshot residue, or no, whatever you call it, I'm sorry, but you could have somebody who's standing just several feet away firing a weapon and cause this wound that you're seeing, correct?
Right. A good rule of thumb is about 6 feet or so before you don't see it, but I've seen, just like everything else in forensics, there's always an exception. So you would need to do the testing with the known firearm to determine that.
So this wound could have been caused by somebody standing 6 feet away with no intervening objects, correct? Possible.
With a firearm producing yaw in the muzzle, yes.
That's possible.
Wow, what a huge win for the
You
defense
were
there.
talking about testing the clothing. Do you know how soon, or how soon that testing has to be done in order for that testing to be effective?
Well, we're looking for heavy metals, and so they persist. Looking for antimony, lead, strontium, barium.
So you can do that test pretty much.
Yeah,
How long?
those metals stay there, and they don't degrade, say, like DNA does. So you can do that testing. I'm not sure, there probably is a timeline, but I know it's a pretty long one to be able to still detect those metals.
And so the fact that that testing was done and there wasn't any gunshot residue discovered is a pretty strong indication that there wasn't any there, period, correct?
That's consistent, yes.
And the same is true for the tree branch, right?
Right, the lead would persist. In fact, I have a pole in Seattle that I test every couple of years, and it still reacts, and the shooting was in 2009.
So the fact that there's no lead residue in that tree branch is a pretty strong indication that there never was, right?
I didn't examine the tree branch, but just based on what I reviewed, that is true, yes.
So the tree branch is completely
just a moment.
debunked right there. This poor guy is not going to get his winning bonus for this expert check. This has been, it hasn't been spicy across, but they're using him to just chisel away. I've had to boost the audio so high. I apologize for everyone's eardrums. I've had to boost the audio so high just so we can hear things. That was terrible. I apologize. But they're using him to whittle down all the different possibilities. You now have an expert firearms witness who's testified that he could have been shot from 6 feet away by another rifle through the backpack and produced the same wounds.
Just a real quick follow-up. We talked about some assumptions that we're making and certain possibilities. And I just want to ask you straight up about certain things that you cannot prove in this case from the ballistic evidence that you reviewed. So number one, You can't prove who the shooter was, correct?
That's correct.
You can't prove which firearm caused this wound, is that correct?
Caused the wound, correct.
You can't prove which type of ammunition caused this wound, correct?
That's true.
Can't prove which bullet caused this wound, correct?
Also true.
Can't prove which direction the shot came from, correct?
Correct.
And we can't prove how far away this shot came from, other than further than 6 feet away from this person, correct?
Yes, true.
That's all I have, Ryan.
State, are you ready to wave the white flag? Wow. They've got to try to rehabilitate this witness somehow, because he just literally said everything the state's been trying to tell you cannot be proved with the evidence that they've given.
Hey, Rick.
Hey, Rick.
We'll leave off real quick.
Remember I paid you 10 grand?
We'll start off with where you just left off. About proving. When we say the word prove, are we talking, you're referring to, you forensic scientists, right?
Yes.
You live in a world of certainty, right?
I do.
Absolute certainty.
I try. Strive for that.
So when you use the word prove, we're talking about, I mean, with absolute certainty, this is the weapon used to kill this victim, right?
Yes.
There's no way for us to have absolute certainty because we don't have the bullet, right?
That's correct.
But there's other evidence in this case, right? You've been in crime scenes before, right?
I've investigated crime scenes.
Yeah. And there's other evidence that helps people out to determine what happened in that situation, right?
Yes.
Other than the weapon and other than the bullet, right?
Objection, leading.
State.
Let me ask you.
He's already on page 2 of his
I'll
notes.
show you Government Exhibit 121. Remember that photo I showed you earlier?
I do.
And that's a picture of the property from an aerial view with the cones.
That's the top down of the porch area.
And you see some, in the yellow thing, you see some cactuses to the right.
Yellow circle?
Yeah, like
over
5
here?
o'clock, 5 o'clock on the yellow circle.
Over here?
Yeah, that one right there. You see cactus, right?
Yes.
Right. The shell casings are found in the yellow circle, right?
They are.
All right, I just want to make sure we all understand the cactus. And let's just assume, if I can just get right behind the, I can just right here, I'm sorry, just right here. If I can put my pin right there, let's just assume there's a potted cactus plant there, potted prickly pear. Assume that, right?
Okay.
Would that interfere with, let's say with my line sight, shooting in a horizontal way outward? A potted prickly pear?
It would depend on how those cartridge cases hit, but I mean, there is a pretty decent pattern. We've all been landing in the same general area.
Come on, can I get exhibit 35? And you saw the body orientation in this case, right?
I did face down.
Face down? And you testified on cross. Did you see any bloodletting?
There wasn't any in the photographs of the scene that there was a blood trail, if you would. I mean, there's obviously bloodletting around the wound, but I didn't see anything, and there was nothing in the notes that I saw that there was any observed.
Just for the jury's understanding, what was meant by bloodletting?
Bleeding, dripping, pouring, depending on the size of the wound, and if the person's moving while they're a bloodletting event, or the patterns to interpret.
I'm going to show you exhibit 35A, already admitted into evidence. See, let me zoom out just a little bit. Did you get a chance to see that photograph at all?
I did.
Is that, do you see, in that photograph, do you see bloodletting or blood trails?
Not from that photograph.
I'm going to object on foundation. I don't know that the witness can testify to this subject.
I don't know if you heard his answer, but he said no. Do I strike the answer?
Yes.
The answer is ordered, sir. Now your foundation. But the question was whether he saw any bloodletting. He said, no.
That's exactly the question and answer I wanted. Like, you're striking the answer though?
Yes, and the objection is foundation. I don't know that this witness can testify to what
right.
bloodletting is or whether he observed it. So foundation.
Well, there's been a lot of questions asked about bloodletting. There were no objections before. I'm going to reverse myself. The question was just a yes or no. Did he see it or not in the photograph? And he said no. So the answer stands.
You testified on cross-examination that you don't use trajectory rods with bodies?
It's still used, but it's not the common practice for trajectory rods and bodies. My understanding is, and certainly in King County and Seattle area, that's not done.
Because the state has
So there's no trajectory rods here.
with trajectory rods.
In your expert opinion, if there's no trajectory rods used by the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Department, does that reflect upon their crime scene investigation?
Objection foundation as to whether that reflects upon a crime scene investigation.
Overruled.
I don't expect to see crime scene investigation. I don't expect to see trajectory rods and bodies, and I would not use it to form my opinion anyway because of all the variables that I'm aware of for using that practice.
Then we're talking about the entry wound and exit wound of the victim.
Yes.
I think we had like a visual, the entry wound in the right flank, you said?
Yes.
Right, and do you remember where the exit wound was located?
Chest.
Chest area?
Yes.
Right, so just explain to me as an expert, entry and exit, what direction is that bullet going?
Back to front.
Back to front? Any elevation?
I think it was slightly upward, but again, there's variability in how a person can move. So that doesn't necessarily mean the bullet was traveling upward.
Variability in how a person moves is one factor, right?
Yes.
The other factor, can the bullet continue to yaw in the body?
Yes.
Oh, I take that.
The witness just took a screenshot of something on his tablet. He pressed the two buttons to take a photo, I believe.
Let me ask you, I'm looking for I think it's actually KK, Defense Exhibit KK. Let me ask you about, this is common, do you wear a backpack? Ever wear a backpack?
I have worn a backpack.
Here, a backpack.
Backpack goes on the back, right?
Ever wear a backpack?
Will it cover the sides of a person, typically?
Typically, no. It depends how big the straps are.
And then when you're talking about the residue on clothing, you testified on cross with the residue on clothing, right?
Yes.
And let's just use this example, when a bullet hits clothing, nothing interfering, I think your testimony was it's going to leave residue, right?
Well, a bullet leaves residue as well as the gases leaving with the barrel. So the bullet will actually have lead on it that it picks up in the barrel. And then we call it bullet wipe. So when it strikes clothing, it will leave like a soot residue around the bullet hole. And that's if there's no intervening object and other things, you will see that. I think all that was tested for, but you have to ask the other expert.
Do you have any, in your report, in your review, was there any evidence of any bullet wipe residue on the victim's clothing?
Not during my review.
You guys have your KK. Let me show you what's marked as Defense KK. This is page 2. Remember testifying about that image?
Yes.
You have no idea about where the photographer is standing or how high or how tall the photographer is taking that photo?
I don't.
I'm going to show you another one. This is the same photograph the government has. It's on State or Defense Exhibit KK. Same location of the photograph, looking at the same direction. You see that one?
Yes.
This one's a little bit different, right?
It is.
In the background, you see that box right in the middle? See that box?
I do.
Right, and you testified earlier, there's no evidence of any strike marks on that box, right?
Not that I saw in the review of the crime scene documentation.
But right behind it, you see like a horizon, the landscape right there?
I do.
Do you know what the elevation level rise is from point of photography to that spot? Do you know what that is?
I believe there's a creek bed, so it's trending downward as it goes that direction, as it goes east, and the scan data supported that.
I'm talking about right at the, right, you see, right where...
He's answered wrong.
Is it higher or lower than the box?
What's higher than the box?
It's higher than the box. And do you know, if you know, do you know where the victim's body's found?
Roughly that direction.
Roughly that direction.
Let me ask you about left-handed or right-handed. Do you know of any evidence that you reviewed that indicated any preference for a right-handed shooter or a left-handed shooter at all?
In terms of the ejection pattern?
No, did you review anything, any document, any piece of evidence that suggested anything about a right-handed or left-handed shooter?
I can't recall. I thought I might have heard something about that, but it wasn't anything I considered.
Let's talk about the ejection pattern. We talked about
out of control.
The little demo in the well. We talked about if I had a horizontal shot straight ahead, right? My ejection pattern is going off to my right-hand side, right?
Yes.
Right. And if I angled my gun up a little bit, the barrel changes, but my, what do you guys call that? The ejection port? Ejection port? I mean, it's still in the same general area, so would that significantly change my ejection pattern?
Well, I would need to do testing, but I would not anticipate it would significantly change. But again, as I testified on the cross, there is a geometry change in that relative positioning, but is it going to be significant? I don't know.
I'm going to show you Government Exhibit 121. So when we talk about change, significant change or not, if I'm standing where the cones are at, horizontal forward, yellow is where the ejection pattern is at. If I were to rotate my gun up a little bit at a 35-degree angle, whatever, am I going to get considerable change? I'll have some geometry change, I got that. But I'm going to have significant, will it be significant change?
Defense does not know what the guy
I don't think so. I've done similar testing with pistols, with different orientations. And I've not seen a significant change in where they ultimately land versus where the shooter is standing. I mean, there's some change, but not significant. But again, significant be up for argument.
I'm going to talk about that in a second, but we're not talking about with a pistol where you go upright and then go gangster style. We're not talking about that with a rifle, are we? Right. All right. Let's talk about significant. We're not, if my angle is 35 degrees, we're not talking about a shooter standing over here, are we?
That's 90,
I don't
sir.
think so.
We're not talking about a shooter standing all the way out here, are we?
Again, I don't think so. I'd have to do empirical testing, but in my experience, I would not anticipate that.
And do you know about the tree? What's your opinion about this tree branch in this case?
I hate it.
Well, in terms of what? About is this tree branch the cause of the yaw? In your opinion?
There's no evidence that the tree branch was impacted by a bullet.
Do you know why the sheriff's department collected the tree branch?
I think it was photographed. That's probably my suggestion. I saw it in the photographs and was like, well, that might be a bullet defect. I knew there was an potentially unstable bullet in play here, and I was looking for intermediate objects, and that was one photo of something that could have been an intermediate object. So
it's your fault we have the branch.
And that, do you remember when that was, when you requested the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Department to collect that?
Not off the top of my head, probably slightly before they did their recovery. I can check my.
Can you just check?
Yeah, right for me.
This would be a good time for defense to say, we'd like to access everything he's reviewing on the stand he's using to refresh his recollection. If you could just do a Celebrite data dump of his iPad for us. The problem is the prosecutor is not hinting in his...
I actually don't have it in my file when they collected it. I think it was summer of 2023. Right after, I think I visited and did the test fire.
The summer of 2023, yes. The incident happened January 30th of 2023, so months later, right?
Yes.
You saw in a photograph a broken tree branch.
Yes.
And you requested recovery of that tree branch.
I did.
Let's talk about, can we talk about clustering? We talked about that rifle being in a set position shooting, right?
Yes.
And even in a set position shooting, it still had some variation when it hit the target 115 yards away.
With the bullet impact or the cartridge cases?
Bullet impact, I'm sorry, thank you. Bullet impact.
Yeah, the bullet impact there is some variation with that particular style. And again, it wasn't the preferred method of stand that I would normally use. So there was a little bit of variability there, but I got as best I could with accuracy.
And that stand's kind of like I always think like a vice grip, grips that gun in place.
Right.
Doesn't gyrate, move.
Correct.
And guns like that, they have a kick, right? They have a recoil, right?
There's a recoil.
Right, and human factors play in. You shoot guns, right?
I do.
There's always a recoil factor with a shooter, right?
There is.
And it changes based upon strength of the individual.
It could.
The age of the individual.
Possibly.
If an individual's healthy or sick, right?
There's lots of factors that could vary how that firearm is held shot to shot.
And the biggest factor is whether or not they're a good aim or not, right?
Are sick people bad aims? Is that what you're saying? Can you detect COVID from a bullet
shooter's
strike?
precision ability impact clustering.
How good a shot they are, you mean?
Yeah, how good
it can.
You testified that you've seen officers who qualify. When I say qualified, do you know what I'm referring to?
I do.
Explain to the jury what qualification means for a law enforcement officer.
Depends on the agency, but usually at least once a year, they have to fire their duty weapon on its course and shoot it at different distances and have a certain degree of accuracy to be able to carry their firearm.
And so they have to hit a target and cluster that target, right?
Yes.
And to be a law enforcement officer, you got to be pretty good, right? To qualify.
Yes.
And you testified on cross that even with that kind of skill set, they still miss their target even at close ranges.
Absolutely.
Just one more second, Your Honor.
I would not consider this rehabilitating your witness. He doesn't know how he's supposed to testify. He's blind and stumbling around.
You testified that no bullet, no projectile was found, right?
That I know of.
And do you know what efforts the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Department went to try to locate the projectile, the bullet?
No.
Let me ask your opinion, and your expert opinion. Is the AK, let me talk about the Wolf. Is the Wolf bullet the most consistent round to cause the injury to the victim in this case?
Most consistent? It's definitely consistent with everything I know about that ammunition type and that weapon platform.
And how about the use of the AK to cause that injury?
Not sure what you mean by the use of an AK.
Pretty consistent. We've got an injury, the distance.
Is this an AK wound?
Right, we have the severity of the injury. An AK can or cannot cause that injury.
It can.
And I have just one more photo. You know what exhibit number that is? You gave me the photo.
34.
Just 1 second, Your Honor.
There's a TikTok that keeps coming to mind
35. And I have
that I want to play. It's an audio bite.
I'm going to show you.
I don't think it's
either
very
H or
appropriate,
M.
but
It's one that H. I'm going to show you. Can you put up something? I'll identify it. Can you put it up? Is it?
there's a gentleman. I think gentleman's voice you hear. I think he's Hispanic, and he's like, "Mr. George, how much you pay the new guy?" He's like, $20. Oh no, he's no good. He's no good worker. That's running through my head.
This is one
when
of
I
the
hear this witness.
One of the pictures in 35, State Exhibit 35. Do you see where the victim's body is located, Rick?
I do.
You put a little circle around the victim's body. Have you seen this photo before?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, and what's in the background? Can you tell?
Mesquite tree.
And further behind that?
Appears to be lights.
Do you know what's behind? Do you know what the lights are coming from?
A light source?
I think the orientation, that's the house.
That's the house. Oh. No more questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Jetty. Ladies and gentlemen, jury, any questions from the jurors? Okay.
Sorry, they went noisy. I had to catch it. Questions from the jurors. We're going to get that counter going. We've been stuck at 14 all day. Quick text message. Oh, is that us? Counsel, are you watching us? All right. Ask for a mistrial. At this point, is it too early to ask for a directed verdict? Yeah. This witness with his side job as being an expert witness, I think it's been terrible. I think he's left. I don't think he made any conclusive findings. He only left in the realm of it's possible and not even probable conclusions. Okay, are we good? She's like, whatever, I've heard everything I need to hear.
Question from the juror is, in your opinion, what direction would the victim fall if shot in relation to where you believe shots were fired from? Face down or face up? If you know.
It's a good question. It's really hard to evaluate that. I've seen many videos of firearms incidents, and people fall in a variety of ways.
I've watched a lot of YouTube.
They usually fall in the direction, the momentum that they're traveling in, because they're focused on other things. But even if they're twisting at the time, they could spin all the way around because they already started that twisting motion. Not that the bullet's twisting them around, it's just that they've started that action. And also there's some nervous reactions that happen, like involuntary jumps and things that occur. So it's really hard to evaluate or predict where someone would fall after being struck, even with a high energy bullet.
That's something the state's going to try to do later.
Counsel, let's get back on headset.
Okay. Oh my goodness. So that witness trying to be helpful shot another witness in the foot with that answer. So, you really can't tell. You can't tell. Well, the state's going to bring a witness on and try to tell and say, we can tell by the way they fell that that's what happened. And that goes against their other experts. So they have competing experts that don't agree with each other. Which one do you believe? And then do you believe all their testimony or some of it? Daniel said he fell backwards and he was found face down. There was no bloodletting that would indicate that he had moved around at the time. The prosecutor closest to us there on the headset is, or the defense closest to us, she's the MMA fighter. Let's hear the question. You've got another question, right? Headsets off.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you making
No other questions.
All right. I told you earlier that the lawyers did some work on their own last night, came in this morning and told us about these stipulations that they had agreed to, and that made it possible for us to get this witness in and complete his testimony and let him go back to where he came from. Talked to the lawyers. They tell me that the trial and the pace of the trial is going just consistent with what they anticipated. So we're on track.
For an April 19th
running
finish.
behind or ahead of time. So given that, unless any of you have any objections, we're going to recess for the day and start back Tuesday morning at 8:30.
The jury's like,
Your chance to make
can we
objection.
stay a little bit?
All right. Before you go, please remember the admonition of the court. It's again a long weekend, 3-day weekend. Do not discuss this case with anyone. Do not have any contact with the lawyers, defendants, witnesses, victims, or victims' representatives. Do not conduct any independent investigations. Do not use any form of communication, post blog, or post anything on the internet during the trial. Do everything you can to avoid media coverage. And with that, have a good weekend. We will see you next Tuesday morning at 8:30, and we'll begin the trial again. We'll go Tuesday through Friday next week. Thank you.
We rise before.
Okay, so as they leave, we're done. I don't know who else is covering this trial. Man, let's see if I think the judge left. So yeah, judge is gone. We're back on the seal. And we're done. All right. Okay, so we're done. We're done early. I will tell you that expert witness, the one question I did not hear asked, which I'd love to know, is how much did he make for that testimony? And I realize the question is like a love-hate question because it's like, of course they need to get paid. They're an expert. They deserve payment for their time. But I'm curious if he's on par with the Embiggen expert who was able to enlarge pictures and make them blurrier. And charged $10,000 for it, or what? Because he came all the way from let's see, the Pacific Northwest, I think it was, and came down. But man, he was over eager, and I think this is something that you see in newer experts that are trying to prove themselves as an expert, because this is his side business, right? He's over eager to try to answer questions, and I think he waded into areas where he did not have expertise. And in doing so, he really kicked the prosecution in the teeth without knowing it, as he's discrediting the trajectory rods and discrediting the ability to judge a direction of a shot based on where the body's located. It's the prosecution has to now move forward and basically discount their own expert witness. Well, potentially still saying, but yes, he did prove that it was from an AK, so believe that part, but don't believe the other parts because he wouldn't know that part as much as this. So, yeah, he says where he doesn't know where the body is. He's looking at the picture of where the body should be, and he's like, I think it was in that direction. It's like, whoa, you did all your testing between these 2 points, and you're saying the shot's possible. You don't even know where it happened? Oh, man. And he's the one that wanted the branch collected. He saw that. He was like, oh, I know we've got a yaw issue on that bullet. Get me that branch. Because I'm telling you, it hit that branch and then it hit the victim. No. The horse the horse, a deer, a badger, a lonely coyote. I don't know what happened to that branch, but it was not shot by a bullet. Oh, man. I wish this judge allowed additional recross, because those questions would be fire. They would be fire. Oh, man. You heard the judge also say that we're not coming back until Tuesday. Remember, we have a long weekend. We take Monday off in this court, but we're going to be back here. We'll be back on Monday. We'll probably be recapping some of the things that happen in other courts as things are going on. I don't know why the lonely coyote came up. I don't want, no mental images were intended there. I meant like a lone coyote just wandering through. I didn't infer that there was any sort of amorous anything. Kicked the prosecution in the teeth. They kicked him in the butt. Daybell jury selection begins on Monday. I don't think that's going to be aired. I don't think they're going to air the jury selection in Idaho. I'm not sure. Is Monday the Daybell trial start? I believe that's jury selection. Brandy Churchwell, I think, is covering that one very well. All right. It's like the old days when we had to wait a week for the new TV episode. Well, we know the coyote existed. Jim Bob, see what you're doing there. He changed side. He's a defense attorney now. The worst was that he was trying to rehabilitate his witness, to get him back to the main points, to get the jury to have those resonating points. This is what you should learn from this witness. And he failed over and over, and it was terrible. The one question that the defense objected to, okay, about the bloodletting and everything, I think he got wrong. And the judge initially, over the defense's objection, or sustained the defense's objection, and then allowed it, but it was to the detriment of the prosecution. So there was a no-win. He just forget that whole page. I'm done. Just move on. Long weekend to complete the bathroom project. We want pictures on Tuesday morning. I'm hoping that we have flooring in place on. I'm not talking tile. I'm talking subfloor and flooring in place. The plumbing sort of positioned where it needs to go. So, oh my goodness. Anything else we need to talk about here today? Hope everybody, if you're not celebrating Easter, that's great. That's great. I'm glad you're here. If you are celebrating Easter, or if you're not, I hope you get some time to spend with either family, if that's available, or some friends or loved ones. Take some time for you this weekend, and if you're celebrating Easter, I hope you have a wonderful Easter. It's Good Friday today. It's a very meaningful day for those that do. This whole weekend is very meaningful for those who do celebrate. So I hope you have an enjoyable Easter period, and that we find each other all well and safe on Monday when we come back, and Tuesday when this court reconvenes. So, oh my goodness. You could add a train wreck to your picture there. Here's what I'm going to do. Let me show you what I've got on this picture. I'm going to solicit some assistance. Ready? Here we go. Let's put this up on 3. Just 1 second. I need a couple of you to help make this. Steve N, you're one of them. I need you to text me on the burner phone, and I'd like to grant you permission, but here's the rules, right? The items that appear on this picture must only be items that are relevant, as in prominent things that happen during chat. We cannot have anything that has any hint of racism or double meaning that is negative in that way. We don't want to go there. That's not what we do. Okay, so we've got some items on here that are from court. There might be a few more we need to add. We've got a potted prickly pear. We've got a magic hat. We've got binoculars, things like that. We don't want any bodies. I think we need to keep people in general off this one. But we're going to have a couple people that we're going to allow in here, and then once they start working on it, maybe over the weekend, Steve, if you've got nothing else to do, shoot me a text on the burn front. I'll pick a couple people. It won't be probably even not a coyote, because that's one of those double meaning things, witchy mama, that's bad. We're going to have different people than we had before. That's cool. We want a different taste. It doesn't have to look like this when we're done. I'd love it if one of you that gets in has Canva or even Canva Pro, because you can have access to a few more images than the rest. But The people that are programming this, I'll have you make an additional page down here, like add a page on the bottom. And then if you need a note, you can just put a little text box in here and you say, hey, I need an image of XYZ. And I can add it if needed. So we'll add a couple people. Red Pen, I see you there. No trajectory rods. You can use trajectory rods, but it might be hard to see without having a body. We don't want anything that's graphic. Obviously, no blood. Nothing that would make this a PG-13 thing. This is a family show. So you can leave notes to me here. I'll give access to those individuals. I'd ask you that please not to share that beyond the group that I send it to, and then we'll give everyone view access probably on Monday or Tuesday to see how the work is going. And all right, Steve, gotcha. Other than that, let's see, a yellow circle of cluster. We could have some target type things, but I wouldn't want like targets on like humanoid shaped targets or things like that. We want to keep it just evidence based and not body based. Skeleton, no, yeah. Let's see. He says after we just seen a shot body. No, I realize that, Lizzie. I don't have any problem with those images being shown on the screen at all. I don't take any issue. Did I have this on the screen before? Were you able to see this? Can we see it now? This is what it is right now. It's just a mess. It's an absolute mess. We've just got piles of pictures, duct tape, flashlights, crow. There is an AK-47. Cactuses, a rocking chair, a megaphone. We've got a horse trough, a ladder, backpack, a smoker. Let's see, another backpack. Probably one of those can go. Magic hat, a potted cactus, a little gazebo. Let's see, binoculars, the compass. We've got all sorts of things on there, and there might be a few more things to add as well. So I'd ask that what's on there sort of be included in the picture. Not necessarily like start from scratch. The butterfly, we've got the butterfly. I've tried to put things on there as much as I could. Magic box with a stick. I did a magic hat. Let's see if I can show you here. The magic hat is right here. I'll drag that up there. So I couldn't find a real magic box. We can trade things out. So if there's a better image, that's fine to do that, but let's try to keep that same idea represented there. So I'll get to work and give out access to just a handful of people. It's only be 2 or 3. I'm sorry, guys. It's just last time it got a little out of control and got crazy, and I'm a little nervous about that. So I'm gun shy. We'll see how it goes this time. We'll fix it. Other than that, we're going to wrap up for the day and say have a wonderful weekend. I hope you all do. I really do. It's been a great week. I like this is a trial that's growing on me. It really is. The barbed wire is covered. It is. There's some barbed wire back here. Let me dig. Let me see if I can dig and find the barbed wire. It's under here. There's the barbed wire right here. Ready? So we've got some barbed wire, or named Bob, but it's all on here. It all just needs to be resized and moved and set up, adjusted. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. I will send out the links to this, and you're welcome to work on it as needed. We'll see how it looks next week. If you don't have Canva Pro, the watermark won't show if the image is small. I don't know what that means. I have Canva Pro. So are we done for the day? The court is over, Mathis. It's over. We're done for the day. So I will just say tonight when you go home, please hug the people you love, smile at someone, make their day just a little bit better, and please stay safe till we go live again, which will be, unless something big happens tomorrow or this afternoon. If there's a huge news story that breaks, we'll be here for that. But if not, we'll be back on Monday morning, bright and early, 8:30, 8:45, 9:15-ish. So, I tried so hard to be on at 8:45 this morning. I got 8:52. That was pretty good, right? All right. As always, you guys are amazing. Thanks to the incredible mods that helped make this possible. I could not do this without them. Thank you. Once again, reach out to me on the burner phone if you would like to be part of the select crew. And please, I think I've already got about 50 messages. So don't be offended if I don't choose you for some reason. It's just I don't want to make it extremely difficult. So have yourselves a great weekend. Enjoy the holiday. Send pictures. Love you all. Be good to each other. We'll see you. Bye.
miss the forest for the trees.
When are we going to break for lunch, Judge?
The zombie apocalypse may be upon us.
I object.